Greetings, Battle Brothers. It's me, Aurelia Tempris, defender of the Golden Throne and servant of humanity. We have more Star Wars versus Warhammer 40k today. It's gonna be good. It's gonna be good, as it always is when we explore a fan with too much times content. Please go follow fan. Honestly, he does wonderful work, and the videos are way too good. He should have so many followers because how awesome it is. So please, please, please go follow. And I already pinned the message up, but please. Oh, I need to just really fast. I need to put do not disturb on. Please, no spoilers. This is my first time seeing it, so no spoilers, please and thank you. Streaming Star Wars versus Warhammer 40k. Save. Done. Done, done, done. Do the do. I will do the do. And Grishnim. You got it. I had one ready to go for this very specific purpose. It's my favorite redeem, I think. So, chat enjoys being spoiled? What do you mean? Like, chat enjoys giving spoilers? I don't know about if I'm doing any spoiling. Mecca, hi! Stop to say hi, but I gotta go. I'll catch the VOD tomorrow at work. Well, I will see you at work. Hi, hero of Imperium. Fantastic. Someone dies in the Warhammer universe? Oh no. Oh no, someone dies. That's a... well, that's normal. Hello everyone. Welcome in. We're hanging out. We're just chatting for a little bit. So, I guess a funny story is yesterday we were building some of my custodian wardens for my custodes army. So I decided to go back and finish those up off stream, and I think I only built 2 or 3 on stream, and I built the rest of them. And I had a very good time. I loved building them. And I had some work I needed to get done. And I took a break after I built my minis. Got some work done. And I was like, oh, I need to do a little bit more work after dinner. But the hair. It's classic, the hair. So I was looking at my minis and I was like, you know what? I want to build more. Oh. Sorry, my head is all over the place today. I was like, And let me just say, I built another mini, but it took a lot of restraint to actually build a lot of my minis. I am, now with the plastic crack, it's gotten to me because I wanted to keep building my minis. I was like, oh, this is so much fun. I want to keep building them. I was having such a good time. So now I'm addicted to the plastic. I'm very much I'm addicted now. It's bad. I was like, oh no. The brain rot is taking over? No. It's not the brain rot that's taking over. I'm talking about I wanted to build like the rest of my custodian army yesterday. And like I didn't realize how fun it was before because I built larger models. So the Sanguinius came in like one large piece. The Baneblade comes in small pieces, but they're not little guys. And then I built the Celestine, but I didn't like that one as much. Like, she just didn't go together, like, the way I liked it. But building my Custodian Wardens, and then I put together the Shield Captain. And, let's just say, I really wanted to make my bikes. I really wanted to make my bikes. I'm not addicted to No, I'm talking about I'm addicted to the Warhammer miniatures, not plastic, although that was funny. Oh, so, don't forget to step outside, touch grass, and breathe in some clean air. No, I refuse. I want to be indoors and build little custodians. I love these boys. They're fantastic. I want to keep building them. I want to build the bikes. I'm not addicted to the glue. No. Um, no, not addicted to the glue yet. Maybe we'll get there. But no, just building the little guys. So I built the rest of them. I almost took a picture. I'm looking at them on my desk and I'm like, man, do you know what I want to do? I want to work on building more of my minis while we listen to Fan. Because that's like, I love listening to the stories, but I'm like, man, I want to do something with my hands. I want to build something. I want to work on something. And now that I've built some minis, I'm like, oh, can I build minis while while we listen? Because that would be fun. That's like my idea of a good time. Honestly, she wants to sit on her throne and command from afar and have her usual. No, 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 no. I don't want to rule from afar. I like to be up close. I like to be aware of what's going on. I am hydrating now. So, I'm like, do I build a bike or do I just pay attention? Like, I'm still paying attention and I'm listening, but I really, really, really want to build more of my custodians or my Sisters of Silence. I'm also thinking, okay, I need some recommendations. So I've been building a lot of the minis, but I don't have really like a lot of shelf space to like store them. So does anyone have any recommendations on like things I could put my minis in? Like I know like plastic containers, but is there like a good like set of containers that could also possibly serve as like a traveling case if I do decide to if I do decide to go to a competition with these, like could we do that? Yo, Mini Death Knight, thank you so much for the bits. Welcome back. Happy belated New Year to you as well. I have the button. Now, I just keep the button up all the time because I love it. I love the button. It makes me happy. Plastic tubs from Chinese takeaways or a big plastic box. I don't know if our Chinese food places have the same containers because I don't think they'd fit my miniatures very well. Get foam cutout storage. Oh, ALJ, thank you for the super chat. To quote Airplane, looks like I picked the wrong week to quit sniffing glue. I haven't seen that movie, but that sounds hilarious. I heard someone say, like, get more shelves. Because I kind of want to, like, display them. But, like, if I'm being perfectly honest, aside from my desk, almost every, like, bit of furniture that is up against a wall is, a shelf. Like, the shelf that I would put them on that I kind of have space for is, like, it's like a grate. So I can't set the minis down on them because they're too small. They'll fall through the cracks. So maybe I'll just get, like, a thin board and, like, set them there. Yeah, that would probably work fine. I'm looking over at the shelf. It's probably fine. Maybe I'll do that. IKEA glass cabinet. Ooh. Yeah, I met someone before I got into Warhammer who had all of their miniatures in a glass cabinet, and I was like, oh, that's kind of nice. But I was kind of like, oh, what's the point? Like, it looks pretty. I'm like, well, what's the point about the whole thing? So... yeah, but now I can appreciate it. I put my minis in egg cartons stacked inside shoeboxes padded with gift wrapping paper. Oh, that works well, too. I'd have to see, like, the sizing on everything. I highly recommend Alien. Every frame is a laugh. Okay, thank you for letting me know, ALJ. Thank you for the super chat. I could always 3D print shelving. You're right, I have a 3D printer. What am I thinking? Why would I buy it when I could just print it? I could just print a little, like, board. Honestly, what I really need is probably just, like, a cardboard. like a piece of cardboard just to lay down on the shelf. That's probably all I really. I'm thinking too hard about this. I'm thinking way too hard. Has anyone ever told you sound like Cinder from Ruby? I feel like someone has mentioned it before. That might have been you. I don't think I do. She sounds more edgy than me, if I'm being perfectly honest. It has been said before. See, I'm not crazy. That's funny, because I watched Ruby, and, like, I never got that impression, and anyone I know has seen Ruby has not said that about me. Although, okay, correct me if I'm wrong. Did I hear that another studio picked up Ruby? That they picked up that show? Because it died, because Rooster Teeth, something happened with them. Yes, is that correct? It died. Rooster Teeth died. And then, yes, thank you, another media group got it. I saw a bunch of ladies on a couch talking about it. I'm like, are they the new... Are they the new people? I haven't watched the whole video. I just heard about it. I just, you know, if they continue it, I hope it gets less weird. The last season was really weird. I didn't really, I didn't care for it that much. It was just more confusing than anything. Rooster Teeth shut down. Okay, that's what I thought. Or got sold. Both. Both and. Yeah, I hope they go back and redo a couple things, because it was a little, I didn't, like I said, I didn't care for the last season. Not me just holding on to this miniature while we're talking. Oh, I just bumped the mic, sorry. I've been, like, holding on and, like, putting, like, rubbing, so I got the shield capped in my hand, and he has a little mohawk on the back of his armor, and I've been running my finger across the mohawk, because it feels good. Like, the sensation's nice. But I don't normally fidget with things. It just felt nice. Thank you, Mr. Shield, for subscribing. You've been around for... You've been subscribed for 6 months. Yo! But that was a very inappropriate message to send. Mr. Shield, that was inappropriate. What the heck, bro? It took me a second. I was like, where is his message? But I can see it in my activity feed, since it was a resubscribe. Congratulations on 6 months, but maybe rephrase what you said. Oh, it was dumb. Anyways, let's see. Hey, what are your thoughts on I assume you're saying a 40K romantic comedy book? Like, if they made one, or is there one existing? As far as, like, I'm aware, I don't know of any, but I haven't looked into it. I personally, like, I like romance as a subplot in my Warhammer books, and not, like, the primary plot. That's my thought. Because I got into 40K because I wanted to get away from, like... Because I wanted to get away from, like, the romance and the heavy, like, smut that's really popular nowadays. So, if it's a subplot, don't mind it that much. Wasn't there a 40K dating sim? Excuse me. A 40K dating sim. Hang on. Where is this 40K dating sim I've heard about? I need to know. I'm waiting for an answer. I need to know if this is a thing. I wasn't aware that this is a thing. I will play it because it's fun. But it's not... Wait a sec. Wait, it's a not safe for... What? It's one of those dating sims. Oh. What? Hang on. It's time to research. I was not aware of this. I mean, kudos to all of you for, like, not telling me. Warhammer 40K dating sim. Oh my. I found a Reddit site and they said it is not a dating sim. It is definitely a giggity game. No way! What is this? Hang on, I'm gonna watch whatever this trailer is. I'm gonna mute my desktop audio. I don't know what it's gonna do. Hang on. I'm watching this. Okay. Is it muted? Good. Good. I'm not I can't hear anything. Oh, they're just running through it. Oh, it's a playthrough. Heavens. Guys are so incredibly down bad. What the heck? Okay, it's a playthrough. I'm not really... Oh, I see now. Okay, I'm done. Okay. Thank you for informing me. I will not be playing that. First off, I'm not into girls, so that makes it... Well... I was like, I'm not seeing anything. I was just kind of clicking through, and I was like, I don't see much of anything. And then it got to a point, and I was like, oh, there it is. I'm not gonna do it later. No, definitely not. Everyone's telling me to repent. They're like, stop it. Stop, Aurelia, stop. Oh my. Well, kudos to all of you that like didn't mention it and were really chill about it. Hello, welcome in, Nova. Sorry, you came in at a weird point. Dino fan, this is probably a bad idea. Yeah, I probably is. I will not be streaming it. Let's just say that. And LJ, it seems like the Femstodes have left their mark. Okay, thank you for the super chat. However, just let me say this, like, I wanted to know what was going on because I never heard of it before, and I would play a dating sim. Emphasis on the dating, not the not safe for work stuff. I'm sorry. Like, holding hands is pretty bad. So let's just, I would play an actual dating sim. Like, I saw someone come up with like a concept for a school, like university dating sim with the Primarchs. And there was like some sanguineous art, and it was like good and tasteful. And it was like, oh, he's like an art student, and da da da. It went into a whole thing, like school stereotypes and archetypes. And I think that would be interesting. I would play that. That dating sim, I would not play. Holding hands is already too much in my book. If there's no oil, she's not interested. I never said that. Wait, hang on. That sounds really bad. How do I get out of that? How do I get out of that statement you just made? I don't even know. I wasn't, Yep, I'm trapped. I got trapped there. Holding hands, that's heresy. Yes, don't hold hands with anyone. Except maybe your dad. Well, that's if like you're 8 or something. I was just thinking, I was like, when was the last time I held my dad's hand? Like, as an adult, like, you just don't do that anymore. A Primarch dating sim sounds amazing, and I don't even like those kinds of games. See, it would be fun. It would be fun. I personally think it is. Are we sure Aurelia really isn't an Eldar? She seems to be getting drawn to a lot of the heresy. What the heck? What the heck? I'm not an Eldar. Oh my goodness. You guys are worse than me sometimes. You guys are worse than me. I didn't find out about the game. I was just curious because I'd never heard of it before. And I didn't even see anything. I just saw a girl in a towel, and that was it. I didn't see anything else. So, like, I got to that point and I was like, yeah, I'm tapping out. That was it. Oh my goodness. We tell you it's not safe for work and you went and researched it? What the heck? True Eldar actions? That's like Drukari, though. That's Drukari. I'm an abhuman. Eldar confirmed. Not even. Not even. I wanted to do a Hogwarts thing with Primaris Psychers in 40k like D&D. Oh, that sounds cool, though. Thank you for the bids. That sounds really cool. I'd play that. Says the VTuber and Eldari avatar. No. Legit. Legit. No. Abhuman. Abhuman. Spell it with me. A-B-H-U-M-A-N. No! I'm not getting... I knew it was a mistake. I told... When I was getting this model made, I was like, oh, because this looks very similar to Dungeons and Dragon character I played, this model. And I was like, should I get rid of the ears? They'll probably like make fun of me. And my friend was like, no, you should keep them. It's funny. And I'm like, but they're gonna tell me I'm an Eldar the whole time. They're like, that's what's funny. Keep the ears. And I was like, and here we are. I was correct. And I'm getting made fun of all the time. Deny all you want. Chat can't spell. Wow. Take a sip of my dew. Fred has good taste, keep the ears. You're just a first edition half Eldar. Oh gosh, we're not gonna talk about the half Eldar librarian. That was all sorts of cursed. Yo, Sir Lemon, thank you so much for the 20 gifted on the YouTube side. Thank you so much. I will accept your gifts even though you have called me an Eldar, and that's very insulting, but I will allow it. You're an abhuman. I need to see a fabulous 12-pack. I have a 12-pack of Mountain Dew. Will that suffice? I have a 12-pack of Mountain Dew. Thomas, thank you for the super chat. You're like, let me see her 6-pack. And I'm like, I pull up a little can of Mountain Dew. Just do it. Only a matter of time before Aurelia calls chat Monkai. Is it Monkai or Monkey? How do you say that? I don't know. Is it Monkai? Like K-A-I, that's how I'm pronouncing it, or Monkey? Yeah, I'm not gonna say it that third way, because that could actually go badly. Monkai, Monkey. Oh my gosh. Okay. I've got a really good. Okay, are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready? Pickup line. Well, see, if you elongate the syllables, Mon-ki, you can't really get in trouble. Mon-ki. I think it's Mon-kai. That sounds very Eldar. Okay. Are we ready? Okay. So, an Eldar, so this would be like a rogue trader type scenario, where you're dating one of the Eldar. There's an Eldar, and then I think there's a Drukari. I haven't finished the game. I should play the game, though. And if the Eldar was trying to flirt with you, it's like, you are the Mon-ki to my heart, or you have the... Monkey to my heart. It's so dumb. It's dumb. It's dumb. Monkek? Monkek? I like Monkai. I never knew how to pronounce it, and I don't think I've ever... I don't know if I've read a book or like an audiobook that had the pronunciation, like an Eldar pronunciate it. Well, maybe it is. End in the Death, perhaps? Yes, Commissar, that one there. Ha, 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 ha. This is so good. Wow, it's already been like 25 minutes. Where does the time go? Where does the time go? Okay. Get him, Commissar. So silly. 1 sec. Okay. Hi, Bart. Thank you for the bits. What's good? Well, we are about to start Star Wars versus 40K, which will be good. Will be good. All right. What's your favorite Space Marine chapter? Blood Angels. Classic Blood Angels. Blood Angels for Legion, Blood Angels for chapter. But you know, you can't hate the Lamenters, and I really like the Black Templars. Those guys. Her favorite is the Word Bearers. They're not a chapter. They're not a chapter, so wrong. Now, shall we get to the main event? I think so. I think we have spent enough time catching up, letting people get in to the stream today. As the cool kids say. They say it like that. Stream. Alright. We shall head over. Okay. I'm gonna pull up the page. Excellent. Now, we are on episode 21. 21. Hello, hi, welcome in, everyone. We are on episode 21 of Star Wars versus Warhammer 40K. It's gonna be good. Let me think. I have my Mountain Dew. I have my water. And we are going to vibe and chill. I'm so sorry we didn't get to watch this on Friday. I felt really bad about that. But we're gonna watch it today. I see I have my mod spreading false information about me that I think Erebus did nothing wrong. That is a lie. That is a lie. Fake news. Fake news. How dare you? I trusted you. I trusted you. There is no proof. I actually have a meme to disprove that. I love that meme. It's fantastic. If you're unfamiliar, I have a very awesome meme about, well, it's technically about Lorgar. It's on my Twitter. If you care to join my Twitter. I post Warhammer memes. I have fun. I don't do anything except repost Sanguinius art and other art I think might be cool, and then I make Warhammer memes. Alrighty. Let's do it, okay? Let's do it. Okay. We're gonna give it a second to see how loud it's gonna be. The volume, okay. It's probably a little loud. Wow, Aurelia, I thought you were a loyalist. I am. You're just picking and choosing. It's a tad loud. Okay, I'm turning it down. Sorry. Once he gets talking, we'll be able to adjust it again. Bum, bum, bum. Struggle. The struggle is real. Ugh. Chat. The struggle is real. I'm sorry, I'm just being dumb and silly.
What do you see out there? Asked the inhuman man. The officer was trembling, shaking. What had he done wrong? How had he not accomplished his duty? He wanted to ask. He wanted to ask so badly. But the Inquisitor had ordered him not to speak, and he couldn't disobey. No matter how he tried, he just could not. They stood at a window, the largest window of his critical relay center. From there, much of the battle between the Jedi forces and those of the primary bunker were clearly visible. Do you want to know what I see? He whispered. Javrik couldn't budge, couldn't even tremble.
I'm sorry, Javrik. Not Maverick. It's like Javelin and Maverick. Javrik. Honestly, it is a very 40k name, but it reminds me of, like, the names that are popular nowadays, like, McKinsley. Instead of, like, McKenna or Kinsley, it's, like, McKinsley, and it's the... And it's, like, the weird amalgamation of 2 or 3 names. Javmorty. It is a 40k name, so I can't give it too much hate, but, like, still.
Below them, men were screaming and dying, being cut down in swaths. They were relying on this center, this station, to help them parse through the chaos of the spreading, planet-wide conflict. But he was helpless. I see a great peace on an even greater board, said the Inquisitor.
Yeah, it's gonna be this
I know you
creepy Inquisitor.
He continued. To you, the pieces are the men, the tanks, maybe even the bases. The Inquisitor swept his hand out as if unveiling an open secret. But to me, the scale is a bit bigger. And this whole planet, New Cadia, constitutes just one valuable piece.
He's like, you are just simply seeing, you think too small. I have the big brain. I have the big brain, and I see bigger and better than you. And you have a small brain. You simply cannot comprehend anything. Your brain's small, my brain big. You don't understand.
And, as I'm sure you know, when playing Regicide, a piece's value is determined by how it can attack the enemy in its current placement, or what advantage might be bought through its sacrifice, he said. Swarms of the maddened, light-wielding wizards spun, running up buildings, leaping chasms, and butchering the guardsmen who tried to slow their advance. The lieutenant could see it all, was watching it all fall apart, slowly, inexorably.
Sadly, New Cadia does not hold much offensive value,
said the Inquisitor.
But its sacrifice. There lies the key to the game. Potentially, everyone remembers the breaking of the Cadian Gate for what it cost us. But I remember what it gave us as well. What if we could gain that again? That unity, that shared purpose. But pay only a fraction of the cost.
Javrik felt his uniform sticking to him, despite how cold he was. So cold he wished he could shiver, could do anything other than watch the massacre happening below, or listen to the man beside him. He felt a wetness cool the edges of his eyes, but could not even blink.
I would have to be a fool not to take it. Not to use every piece to its fullest potential. Don't you agree?
Oh, no.
I thought so. And since we both agree on what must be done,
Bro.
let me tell you now, before the close, what will be done.
The crooked man whispered into his ear, the act nearly causing the officer to void his bowels on the spot.
Oh, not just like empty the contents of his stomach. No, his bowels. His bowels, that... Yeah, I don't like his voice already. Kudos. Good job on the voice, fan. And, like, imagine that whispering in your ear. I bet you he's fun at parties.
We will tease them out.
Ew, don't say
we
tease.
can. We will make legends on this planet. Saints and martyrs for all involved. We will make sure every eye falls on this pitiful world.
Oh, boy.
We will make an audience of the galaxy and show them the wonders of this war. Do you see? We shall let them fight and shoot and kill. We shall let the Republic have its moments. Allow them to believe they can win.
Oh.
And we shall make heroes of our fallen. Legends of our stands. We shall let them struggle.
Oof.
The man cried, his voice nearing inhuman laughter as he continued.
We shall let the replicae swarm and die. Let the angels fly and fall upon them.
This is
We
awful.
shall watch men and beast and xenos be broken and scattered like chaff before weapons of war unimagined by our foes. Do you hear me, Lieutenant? We shall let them make them struggle. And when finally all eyes of worth are here, and naught can happen over this sickly sphere that is not seen, when this false war reaches its crescendo, my messenger shall blow upon the devil's horn.
The Inquisitor
is
seemed to
not
settle
good.
with those last words, his smile still present and horrible to behold. Javik tried to budge, tried to say something, to ask why. Why was he being shown and told all of this?
Yeah.
Why had they killed all the men in his relay post?
Sorry. I forgot to turn the memes off. My bad. They should all be off now. Sorry about that.
And when that horn is sounded, hell shall follow. A reckoning to turn the stars red and earn us the Imperium we deserve.
I did not like that. I did not like that. No. Oh, gosh. Most trustworthy Inquisitor? Definitely. Uh-huh. I hope you guys are feeling better because it came. That did break the tension.
Glorious. And so close now. Oh, you are wondering why I didn't kill you like the others. Alas, stifle that guttering flame of hope.
Yeah.
Your death is assured. And what's more, it shall be the hardest death among any suffered here.
Oh, nice.
For my companion has appetites I must sate.
Oh.
A regrettable but entirely valuable sacrifice. I promise you, in this, you and New Cadia are very much the same. But I am not an unmerciful man. And so, before I send you to your fate, I give you this small elucidation, in the hopes you might, in your suffering, appreciate some aspect of your purpose and service.
The words were surreal to the lieutenant, all the way up until he felt taloned hands wrapping around his torso and waist. He tried to scream harder than he ever had before, and the effort made him gasp, suddenly somewhat free, at least so much as his voice was concerned.
You are insane!
He gasped, trying to extend the control to his limbs and body, but finding the vice around those only tightening, preempting his efforts. Let me eat him, Master. You had your words. Let me have my meal. Hissed the monster who held him from behind. This time, Javik did release his bowels, though the Inquisitor did not seem to notice. He looked almost genuinely sorry, or as close as one could get with such sharp teeth and strange, inhuman eyes.
Oh gosh, that's awful.
I thank you for your service,
the man said.
No!
Jevrik gasped, but the Inquisitor looked past him now and nodded his head once towards whatever it was that held him. Jevrik managed to scream once more, briefly, before he was enforced into silence again.
That's awful.
But despite his quick silencing, Jevrik would suffer for a small eternity, as the demon he was given to took its time and fed.
I was like, this is definitely a demon. This is bad. A friendly friend, yes, 100%.
Anakin shuddered, sweat weeping from his skin as he hung, blind and paralyzed. The Jedi felt like he had been locked inside a microwave, which had been set to its lowest power setting and was now left to slowly roast from the inside out.
Yikes.
He tried to struggle but could hardly tell if he was bound or truly paralyzed, though he was certain that the blindfold which was sheathing his eyes was real. He wiggled and, after several sickening moments, concluded that he was bound. Bound and, as it turned out, hanging upside down, an unpleasant fact he discovered when he suddenly found himself heaving up what little remained of the breakfast he had eaten earlier.
Oh, gross.
The sick spilled through slits in the gag they had forced into his mouth, choking him for a few seconds before it drained, falling into his nose and the upper half of his face.
Ew.
Anakin tried to swing, to whip himself clean by the motion, but was held far too tightly to do more than add a subtle sway to the encompassing imprisonment he had been placed into. And still, the roasting, sometimes hot, sometimes cold, went on.
Oh, that's
He could see nothing.
terrible.
hear nothing but his own gasps and groans, and taste nothing but his own bile. Even the Force was distant, if not gone entirely from his perceptions.
The hook on the ceiling is concerning me.
This was torture. And it was only the beginning, he knew.
There's gonna be another dude in there? Because they
Anakin
had someone imprisoned in there. Maybe they have multiple. Oh my gosh, are they hanging up like cows in like a butcher shop? Ooh.
Not need to access the Force to know that his ordeal had just begun, or so he had thought. But to his unspeakable relief, he heard something, a hiss, the sliding of the door, and the whir of tracks that he knew from memory.
Wow.
His hope was made real when R2 beeped a greeting to his imprisoned form. The Jedi groaned in response, and a few moments later, felt the bindings loosening, gasping as he was released and dropped to the floor.
I was gonna say, that's gonna hurt.
Anakin tried to rise, but found he was still bound in sheets of thick, rubbery cloth, a substance he was liberated from a few moments later when R2 rolled over to him and used his cutting torch to free
Good on
his
R2.
friend. Anakin rolled over and clawed at the gag and blindfold that had been locked around his face, tearing them away and coughing for several moments, ripping off a piece of his robe and wiping his face with it.
Oh, he's got
Eyes clear of both.
They even put his puke down. Look, he's got it on his sleeve, and that's the puke on the floor. Yay, look at him! He does look like a trash can, especially like the way he looks now. That's so cute.
Blinding restraints and sticky sickness, he looked around at where he was. A small room, clearly some form of interrogation chamber. It even had a pair of chairs and a desk between them, with the interrogator's chair being of an obviously more comfortable nature. However, hanging behind the uncomfortable, stark metal chair that would normally be the place of the person to be interrogated were two hanging, coffin-like pods.
Yeah.
They were thick, hinged, and hanging upside down. Anakin's open and empty, the one beside it still closed, its inhabitant silent and inscrutable behind its restraints.
There's someone in there.
Ugh. The Jedi groaned, holding his throbbing, fevered skull. R2 chirped sadly, and Anakin shook his head in response. No, it's not that. You have no idea how glad I am to see you. Seriously, I thought I was done for a second there. It's just... this place.
Yeah, they'll do a doozy on you.
Wrong. It denies the Force, and frankly, it feels like it's denying me too. R2 beeped at that and straightened, rolling over to the closed door and extending his access probe towards a similar control slot. Hold on, R2. Before we go, there is something I think we should do, he said.
You're gonna free the other guy?
The black walls were coated in scrolls of yellowing paper, adhered to the stone, or stone-like material, by stamps of what looked like red wax. They seemed to silently shift and waver in a wind that couldn't be felt, and that wind was subtly drawing itself in towards the other prisoner. Anakin approached the hanging metal sarcophagus and knelt to look into its face. It had a pallid, vaguely feminine mask with empty eyes and grills over the mouth. The Jedi could still hear the soft rasp of breath coming from within, though he could see no eyes as he knelt, looking into the dark confines of the mask, and was certain that the prisoner had been blindfolded as well. "Can you hear me in there?" asked Anakin, voice hesitant. No response. The cadence of the breathing did not even change. Fair enough, Anakin thought. This person had been here for who knows how long and could only reasonably expect an interrogator to be speaking. If this prisoner did know something else of worth, he or she would be loath to let it go or make it easier to retrieve by engaging with their torturers. But Anakin wanted to know this person, wanted to know what manner of enemy the Imperials had already made before confronting the Republic. He was tempted to try to use the Force to scan for surface thoughts, but even without that monster from before being present, his connection to the Force was pained and tenuous. And he knew that something in this place, in this very cell, was jamming or blocking his connection to the Force. Open this one up too. R2-D2 returned to the order with a low, hesitant warble. I know,
don't like that
but
image.
Whoever this is, it's someone they desperately want dead, almost as much as they want whatever they know. I can't turn back after having come this far, so let's not waste any more time. Pop it open. he said. R2 paused, beeping an affirmative and drawing his friend's attention before launching the Jedi's lightsaber out towards him from a small hatch on his dome. Anakin snatched the saber out of the air, only fumbling it a little before activating it with a fierce smile, nodding in gratitude to the droid before turning to fully regard the other prisoner. The astromech rolled over to an input slot in the wall and inserted the access probe, twisting it for a couple of seconds until the first lock clamping the sarcophagus shut hissed loudly and cracked open. "Sector clear," said the clone commander, his men spreading out from his position and stepping over the corpses of the droidmen and Imperial soldiers. The chamber was dark and cavernous to a ridiculous extent. Icons of the Imperials' perverse droid worship hung from every corner, and the bays were filled with various massive vehicles, most of which, thankfully, appeared incomplete or in the midst of maintenance. The speeder bikes chirped past, their spotlights cutting lines out of the darkness as they swam through the air in alternating bursts of high-speed movement and lazy hovering. Between the bikes and hunting clones carried aloft on jetpacks hovered the specialized ISP speeders. Like larger, thicker predators, the ISPs floated, capable of movement nearly as rapid as that of the speeder bikes, despite the fact that they mostly merely rotated slowly, holding key positions in the room as the others moved through it. This had been one of the most entrenched areas of defense, so much so that Commander Bly himself had been forced to respond to it. The vast majority of the Imperials had fallen back towards the Basilica and its intact defensive ring, but not these men. For one reason or another, they had tried to fight with the superior, mobile forces of the clones, refusing to even retreat from the massive room, which allowed Bly's vehicle support to outflank them handedly and thereby cut them down. Losses were sustained, and he wouldn't deny that, but by and large, the operation was a complete success. Already, the generators they had found were being rigged to explode, and these vehicle bays were next.
Oh boy.
Yet, as he looked upon the mountainous shape of an 11-barreled tank that would put even a juggernaut to
An 11-barreled tank. I love it. That is amazing. 11 barrels. Fantastic.
shame, he began to reconsider such weapons. Perhaps this was the reason the imps had tried so hard to hold this room. His considerations were interrupted by a ping in his comm. Standing on the ground and allowing his jetpack to cool, the clone reached up to his helmet and accepted the communication, and the contents shocked him. One of his squads had discovered and captured a droidman, and, what's more, the Imperial claimed to be the leader of the red-robed cyborgs themselves. Without any delay, Bly ascertained their position and kicked off of the ground. The bay became a blur around him as Bly arched up into the air, smoothly locking onto the location he sought and redirecting himself in that direction with a few twitches of his controls. ISPs and speeder bikes zipped around him to move ahead and circle the spot. Already, he could see that many of his men had surrounded the zone, guns up and aligned carefully towards what he assumed to be the place where the prisoner had been cornered. He landed neatly near the center of the action, making a quick scan of the situation. He had so many questions, and even beyond that, having access to their leader would likely allow him to force surrender out of the holdouts they were sure to encounter later on. The clones who had found her were not far, and came to report when Bly descended onto the scene.
No!
2 ISPs hovered overhead, spotlights pointed on the hunched figure in red. The clones, 10 of them, surrounded her, carefully aligned to avoid crossfire. He saw that none had approached beyond a certain point and landed closer than they stood. He straightened and strode towards the curled, vaguely feminine figure. Her hands were splayed out and empty, but even that gesture was spoiled by the fact that those hands seemed utterly bladed from fingertips to palms.
Yeah.
Bly had seen something like those hands before. He had recalled the Trandoshan statue made entirely out of Wookiee Reich blades. Its reptilian hands extended as if the figure was about to pounce. It had made him uneasy to look upon that inanimate thing then, and it made him feel no better to be reminded so precisely of it now. He
That's
halted
fair.
well out of arm's reach and aimed his blaster towards her, aligning it a little to the left. "I have questions," he said sternly. The figure lifted its hooded head. The priest of these droid men was a hunched, curled thing, with a large, misshapen mass upon her back, which bulged in her robes and rose above her head.
How does he
She
know
was
it's
bent
feminine,
beneath
though?
it, and yet, despite
Because he said the slightly feminine figure. And, like, it would make more sense if she looked like this picture. But, like, how do you tell it's feminine if she's got so many augmentations?
this, her face was not grotesque, as many of these things had been. In place of an unnatural melding of flesh and metal was a silvered mask, reflecting in preternatural detail the features of a young, beautiful human woman. Her eyes,
I
a
guess
dark
the
orange,
mask helps.
peered from the metal lids of the subtly smiling face, its expression frozen in the casting of its creation. "I know," she said to him in a startlingly human voice.
But you are not a full knight!
Kallax said to her. Nerva furrowed her brow. "No, but
It's
as
a
I've already told
Steve.
you, that doesn't matter. I can do this. I just need to get down there," she insisted. The sergeant's frown only deepened. His squad stood around him, all of them now conscious and present, looking about furtively as they waited for a decision to be made. She had thought the hard part had been over once Bofen had brought her these guardsmen, but it seemed they would not be easily coaxed deeper into the maintenance bays.
I've served with Imperial Knights before,
The sergeant said flatly. "But not Knights of the Mechanicus. My master, rest his steel, gave his life to get us this far. He did so because he knew I was ready, and I am. All I need is passage
Nice.
into the cockpit, and I'll be able to turn this whole battle around in minutes," Nerva insisted, wincing as she moved her slung arm and rekindled some of the pain there. The sergeant shook his head, his scrunched face looking decidedly unconvinced.
There isn't any way in the Omnissiah's deepest hell that you are ready to pilot one of those walkers unless you've ticked all your boxes. You want me to rely on an impossibility for our safety, and I just can't do that. We're not Skitari. Our priority is to regroup with the rest of our forces,
He said. "Damn you, Sergeant, listen! My master's knight is not the only thing down there. The Magos Dominus herself is waiting for me. Those bays have Bane blades, Honor crawlers, Basilisk artillery batteries, and their assorted ammunitions."
Oh, if the Magos is down there, she's waiting for the knights to come in and take down the Republic's command structure.
Nerva shrilled. "Those machines cannot, must not fall into the enemy's hands. The resultant damage from that kind of technological appropriation, especially this early in the war, could be lethal for us both. All of us, the Mechanicus and the Imperium." But even in the face of her impassioned words, Sergeant Kalak-Norn looked less than convinced. She understood that. She didn't want to die in this place either, but the threat to the technology of the Mechanicus could not be overlooked for something as petty as personal survival. She grit her teeth, watching as the sergeant conversed with some of his soldiers. The seconds were dripping by, and it was only a matter of moments before the replique regrouped and moved to take back the chamber. Auri coursed through her like a current, and she did not neutralize it, for she knew that not all emotions were meaningless, and most vital to survival among all of them was the ability to feel fear and take it seriously.
Yeah, good
That
good
very
job.
serious fear very nearly made her do something rash, but she was forestalled from any reckless course of action by Kallax's words, spoken only a moment later.
All right, fine. What's your plan?
He said. Nerva floundered for a moment before clearing her throat. "It's simple. We go to those super heavy turbo lifts, get down into the greater vehicle bays, and get me to the Knight. Once inside, I'll pilot it over to the lift so you can raise me up to surface level. Then all of you mount
yeah.
up somewhere and hold on, since I'll be making my own exit and then rejoining the fold," she said.
And the other tech you mentioned, what about it?
Asked the sergeant. Nerva bit her lip. "I suppose I'll have to fire the last impulsor down into the Prometheum reserves. The resulting blast may not destroy all of our war machines, but it should bury them in flame enough to keep the enemy away until we can properly take back these shrines, she said.
Oh, that's smart. Good
The
idea.
sergeant considered it for only a couple of seconds longer before nodding stiffly. Right, let's go then, he said, waving to his guardsmen. Nerva sighed in relief as she turned and led them at a run to the massive lifts. The greater vehicle bays were 3 levels down, and had it been Nerva's decision, they would have ridden one of the 4 massive lifts all the way to their destination. She was eventually grateful, though initially irritated, when Sergeant Norn took her arm to forestall her. Hey, what are you... she started to say.
Ooh.
Gala, snap an eye down there for me,
He said. The single woman in their team, Gala, sprinted forward to the ledge of the lifts, going to one of the vacant shafts and unslinging a long lass. Nerva knew the pattern at a glance, and knew the power of the scope it came equipped with.
Nice.
So
That's
she did
cool.
not doubt the woman's words when she reported that the enemy was present on the lowest level. Bofin, Nerva said, speaking through her mouth and the noosphere both. The hovering skull zipped forward in response
skull.
and came before her. Tie into my optic receiver. Good. Now, go down there and scout and stay out of sight, she said to it.
Yeah,
The
Steve.
skull chirped an affirmative and hovered out over the yawning pit
Yeah.
that led down,
Get 'em.
descending silently
buddy.
and rapidly. While it did, Nerva fished through her robes and withdrew a data pad from one.
Hi, fan. Welcome in. We are watching episode 21. Love the servo skulls. They're my favorite. So, hi. Good to have you in. A fan with too much time. The creator of the series is on the YouTube side. For those of you on Twitch. So, yeah, we're having a good time here. I'm bundled up in my blanket. I have my Mountain Dew. I am relaxed and chill. If I was sitting on my couch, I would probably this is just so comfortable. Like I would fall asleep. Not because it's boring, just because I'm so comfy right now.
One of her many pockets. The flat black rectangle of glossy material was only a little larger than her hand, but it would serve her purpose. She carefully drew a cord out from her elbow and plugged it into a small, circular socket on the side of the pad. After that, it took her less than a second to connect and begin streaming Bofin's visual field
She's
into
streaming.
it. The soldiers crowded around to see, and they all watched as Bofin drifted into the massive room and began to look around.
Frag this,
said the biggest man, Janus. By the fire of the throne, how are we even... stuttered another, a soldier who had been unconscious until recently. Nerva felt her organic muscles clench. She wanted to resent their reactions, but even she had trouble doing that, seeing the same thing they were. The bays were covered in replicae, most scouting about and securing the location on foot, while others flew and swept through the air on jetpack units. To add to that already insurmountable force, slim Republic jet bikes zipped and flew through the air like Harkonnen storm snipes, and between them, the hovering, menacing forms of larger gun platforms were visible. All in all, it seemed like many times more than they could handle. And before Nerva could
it's
even
not looking
begin
good.
calculating approaches to this now suicidal mission, the situation seemed to grow only darker than before. Oh no, she whispered, in spite of herself.
Horus is hairy sack. Is that who I think it is?
Carrick Norn groaned.
What the actual heck? What the heck, man? What the heck? That was the last thing I wanted to think about. This is the last thing I wanted to think about today. No. It's very creative. Let's just say it. It's incredibly creative. It's very creative. Oh my. I thought Horus was bald. We're not going to be talking about Horus and The hair. We're not gonna talk about that. What the heck? Oh, yes, he's bald on the head. Just because you're bald on the head doesn't mean... I don't think I need to explain that. Parasec. You deserve a timeout for that. You deserve a timeout. That is so bad. Why would you do this to me? Why would you? Oh my gosh, I am no longer comfy. It is too warm in here. It's too warm now. Oh my gosh, no, no, stop it, everyone, stop it. Fan is being a bad influence. Don't listen to him. I want the clones to win now just because of that. Oh my gosh, I could have gone my whole life without thinking about that. And now I've thought about it. And what's worse, I didn't need to think about that. I didn't need to think about the Primarchs and how I didn't. Sponsored by Manscaped. Oh. Oh my god. Dude, look. These are all things that everyone else brings up. I did not start the stream by talking about Horus and his lower extremities, and I didn't bring up the dating simulation, the 40K dating simulation. I didn't bring that up. Someone told me that. You could have gone your whole life without, and now you shall never know. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. I'm stunned. I'm stunned. Okay, well. Thank goodness. I can't. Stop. Stop it. Stop. You can't. Oh my gosh. It's warm in here now. Like, I have my ceiling fan on. I was cold before this. And now it is too hot. It's too warm in here now. Oh, this has become a PG-13 stream today. This really should have been Thursday. This should have been done on Thursday, but this is, wow. Okay. I will control myself. I will contain whatever this is. Oh, okay. Whew. All right. Time to turn my second fan on. It is too warm for this. Okay. Okay. Thank you for that, fan. I do not like you now. I'm kidding. That was quite creative. This isn't the first time I think something similar has happened. It was very creative. Very creative. Hi, Elliot. Thanks for the super chat. I was watching The Phantom Menace with my sister, and it was just her fawning over little Anakin. And calling Padme names. Very specific names I won't say on the stream. Wow, incredible. Incredible. This is hi, hello. I'm so sorry you came in at a weird moment. I've been scarred. I have been scarred for life now. I've been absolutely scarred for life. I hope I forget this. And we never experience this ever again. Okay. Putting my headphones back on now. Because I had to rip them off. What happened? Aaron, I am sure there was a clip about it that has been made on the Twitch site. If not, join the Discord because they're going to talk about it there too. I'm pretty confident. I don't want to get into it. We'll start it all over again. Chaos, it leaves its mark on us all. Yes. Yes.
Groaned from over her shoulder. Nerva nodded numbly.
Oh.
Standing there, surrounded by the enemy, was the Magos Dominus herself. The tech aspirant felt a pit forming in her stomach, and she couldn't help but flounder at the sight of this latest despair-ridden revelation. Is there any way to communicate with her? Asked the youngest member of the group, the driver of the now abandoned Chimera. No, Wait, yes! Nerva said, jumping at the sudden thought. I can attempt a new spheric connection using Bofin as a free-moving relay, she said, already beginning the process to accomplish just that. Moments later, she took a deep breath as the icy embrace of the new spheric data currents fully enveloped her, diving in and beginning to swim. The standard new spheric relays were all working with either sustained damage or lacking.
What? This is interesting art. Look, it's a robo chicken. It looks like the chicken from Moana. And she's got like Polynesian looking tattoos. I bet you that's the... Oh, did they just make Moana like a psyker or something? She's got that orange wrap with the tan skirt. I think it is like supposed to be Moana. I got distracted, sorry. I was just like, this robot chicken looks just like that character.
Power, barely allowing the functionality for any circulation of data at all. But with Bofin now acting as a relay, the currents were pushed into a more regular stream. She followed the flow it produced, and with a mind made of liquid crystal information, she reached out, sliding through and past dead ends and fragmenting transfer codes until she reached the outstretched mind of the Dominus herself. Ah, there you are, said the senior tech priest. I've been waiting.
Ooh, get wrecked. Get wrecked.
The Magus Dominus Kali Delta was amused by the first question the replicate chose to ask her. Here she was, the presumed commander of this clone's enemy, evidently at his mercy and willing to answer his questions, and the first thing he chose to ask was devoid of nearly all perceivable use. The veracity of the aforementioned presumptions and the naivety required to take them seriously alone struck the venerable priest as adorable. Such a lapse was clearly the product of a mind which had been given only 14 or so Terran cycles to mature and learn the world. But the question he chose was almost provocative in its lack of utility and indeed its chosen subject matter. But she did not question it, and, in fact, she prayed to the machine god that he would ask yet more useless queries as she performed her role and distracted him. Are you a droid or a human? The cloned soldier before her asked, the
That's
nozzle of his ionized particle blaster
I know why,
centered
but
on
still
her
not
slouching
really
form.
important.
She took a moment as if considering the question, though the answer was obvious. My mind is human, she said through her vocalizers, feigning cumbersome speech, drawing in their attention as they pieced together her words and sentences. But my body is improved, artificial. Why the scrog have you done this to yourselves? Why are you here? What is the objective of this occupation? The replicate snapped out. Talk, imp scum!
Wow.
She raised her hands a little higher, affecting a tremble through her limbs. With her precise control, it was easy, no matter how unthreatened she actually felt. In spite of his
Dang.
commands,
She's
she took her
gaslight girl
time
bossing.
answering, beginning with his first question. I am an anointed, chosen of the Omnissiah, he who perfects through intention, circuit, and steel. We replace our weakness with strength. This is our way, she said. Fine, enough. Why are you here, droidman? What do you want? The replicate pressed. I am
You should.
here studying the Republic and its defenses, its threat level, she said, recovering technology, running projections, she added. Kali Delta was, of course, doing far, far more than that. But at least this was no lie. She
Yeah.
had done all that she had mentioned. It was the predominant reason she felt so at ease, even then. Is that so? What did you find out? And keep it short, imp, or I'll stun you and send you back to base hanging from a speeder. The cloned thing
Oh.
threatened.
Dang, he's
He-
mad.
Findings are incomplete. The Republic's fighting forces are built on solid foundations. However, while threat vector 1I through 4I seem to be substantially met, this cannot be said for threat vectors I5 through I8, she said. What by the many moons is any of that supposed to mean? The replicate demanded. Said simply, the Republic's clone forces can match most standard elements of our own with enough variables to potentially succeed, she clarified. Well, that's obvious, I'd say, said the Republic clone. However, the Magos continued, your special forces are entirely unprepared to counter our own,
Oh,
and your elite deployments are limited or do not exist.
yeah, she's just stalling
Beyond
at this point.
Jedi, none of your known infantry forces rank above I4 as a threat vector.
Oh.
Sure, then what do you... He began to ask. Before he could finish, the clone stiffened, a voice reaching him through his helmet comm. Moments before the sound of weapons fire sprang out from a different section of the bays. He waved his hand, and a few of the soldiers and speeders began to scatter. Already the Magos knew that the others had been spotted by one of the unattended patrols, and prepared to escalate her diversionary tactics. Her robes billowed out, and the sudden movement drew blaster fire from the men around her.
Get him.
The shots collided with her refraction field, a powerful pierce of archaeotechnology, and one which she maintained in prime condition. It swallowed
Nice.
their blaster bolts, transforming their mass and energy into bright white lights as servo skulls spilled out of the sleeves of her robes like masses
Yeah.
of writhing flying insects.
Release
The
the
hump, which had
Steves.
bent and burdened the tech priest's form, shrank and diminished, revealing its true nature as the swarm spun around them, most of the skulls
Get 'em.
unharmed thanks to the defensive field. Slowly, Kali rose from her previously hunched posture. The clones who had been shooting now paused.
She's actually like a total babe because she had all those skulls. That lump in her back, nah, it just 50 skulls.
Pausing to shield their eyes from the bright flashes of light their weapons had caused. The first to reorient and react was the commander, though again, she took her time, reaching up with bladed hands and gently seizing the hem of her robe, sliding it over her thin shoulders. Her task was distraction, and she knew just how to distract soldiers. The clone walked.
She sticks out her leg seductively. She's like, yeah, you stick the leg out. Ooh, wow.
Eyes wide inside his helmet as the garment pooled onto the ground around the priest's feet.
No, she
revealing
totally...
her bare body beneath.
I roll to seduce. I roll to seduce. I mean, she's not wrong. It does work. I'm not saying that because I have experience in that. I'm just like, I would be stunned too. I think everyone would. Because you're like, why is she doing that? Why, huh? This is not the time or place, madame. She's gonna do more than just the leg.
She would have smiled had her face.
Oh, I was gonna say, and she probably doesn't even feel bad about it because, like, she probably got her body super augmented. So she's like, yeah, this is just me. Not even like flesh or anything, so it's not even weird for her.
Face not been a mask, perhaps even blushed despite her age. Lithe, angular, and perfectly efficient. Her entire true body was built of magnetically interlocked blades and gears. Each and every single one lovingly sharpened and polished into monomolecular perfection.
Okay, that's cool, though.
Every last literal inch of her was a dedication to the machine god's wrath. And every last solitary centimeter of her body could inflict that wrath onto pain or onto pain of death. You had begun to ask something, Commander Bly, she said, now speaking smoothly, discarding the slow effect. Kali had learned his name from hacking into their comnet, a net she had been keenly listening to during their assault on her facility.
Dude,
her
gosh.
temple.
Get him,
She
queen.
stepped out from the robes which had bound her, ocular systems linking with the floating skulls which flew about, girding her memcore for overclocking protocols as her internal secondary and tertiary cogitators awoke with a hum. I believe you meant to ask, what do you rank yourself at? Allow me to answer with context, she said. The clones began to fire, but again her refraction field drank it in easily. You are a veteran commander of the 327th Galactic Star Corps. At your projected best, you may rank I-5 as a threat vector. I am a Magos Dominus of planet Volcrus, beholden to the priesthood of Mars. At the current moment, I am empirically ranked threat vector I-7. He had begun to back away, reaching...
Oh no, you're hosed, buddy. Honestly, that's incredibly clever. Because, I mean, if you think about it, this only, like, confirms her reason that, like, that the flesh is weak. Not that I think this is the case, but she's like, look at all of these fleshlings that just, like, totally, like, got struck dumb because of what I did. So she's like, this would only, like, validate her. She's like, I've transcended flesh by adapting to a metal body. If they understood what I know, this wouldn't have been a problem for them. It's smart. It's smart. It's a very good tactic. Especially in the sense that she's like, it's not graphic, I guess, in this context.
somewhat behind his back for something mounted onto his belt, but it was already too late to stop her. The spinning, zooming servitors which flew around her finished linking into her systems, and the cogitators within her completed their combat boot sequences.
Nice.
Her senses were filled with the sensor feeds of dozens of drone skulls, and with the aid of her additional cogitators, the incoming data was parsed, sorted, absorbed, and then applied. Kali had used her predictive algorithms to rip Drukhari witches asunder, and had long ago learned that all she required to become death itself was a sufficient number of eyes to see with.
I love it.
Her refraction field finally
Face.
died, smoking as it entered its recharging cycle, but its purpose was served. Almost without conscious effort, Kali began to dodge, swivel, and swerve around the incoming weapons fire, and never once did she stop advancing.
I love that. If I was going to be Mechanicus, that would be my vibe. A bunch of servo skulls and very dexterous. No comment on how she decided to distract the soldiers. That's not really my vibe. I just think it's smart.
The artillery had stopped. It had just stopped. First, bit by bit, and then all at once. Sando's ears throbbed in the growing silence, the last volleys of precise death echoing still through and between the Axumite towers. He jumped and almost fell out of step as his brother spoke beside him, his voice loud in both the air and his earpiece, the comms having been required to talk and be heard at all only moments ago. "I guess the artillery crews found something better to shoot at," said Biskin, voice trembling. Sando nodded, but neither of them believed it. After all, they'd still hear the artillery firing at someone else, if they were firing at all. And they were not. For the moment, he and his platoon were marching in their column, the main body of the army shielded and allowed to progress at rapid pace by the vanguard forces the general had sent out ahead of their advance, and, of course, by the steady curtain of artillery fire. For minutes now, they had been watching the Medivacs move back and forth from their line to the unseen fronts, delivering wounded and dead alike in numbers that chilled the clone. They had not started this close to the front, but slowly, more and more of the mainline platoons had been redeployed as vanguard support, presumably as a response to severe losses. Sando looked around, visors sweeping the front and sides of the vast roadway they were using to progress. Vast was actually the wrong word for it, he would think as he took it in again. Expansive, gigantic, or even excessive would have been more accurate attributions. The road shrank and swelled at odd intervals, as it was both joined by other, smaller avenues for one stretch and then divided back down in the next. At the current moment, it was easily large enough to accommodate 2 Venator-class Star Destroyers landing side by side, and still have a bit of room to spare. Initially, the road had been bare and clear, with only a surprisingly light spattering of civilian vehicles and wrecks, and almost no residual damage from the invasion prior. Now, however, they were marching over ground that the vanguard and artillery had fought and cleared ahead of them. The once straight streams of marching men found their lines distorted as clones picked their ways around piles of corpses, burning tanks, smoldering craters, and hastily assembled barricades and broken hardpoints. The smell of death and the breath of countless weapons was already tainting the air with its familiar musk, and Sando shuddered. He had thought it would be impossible for the terrain of Azure City to spark memories of the Shadow World campaign.
Oh.
The ARC-trained trooper felt the eerie silence around them thicken and become familiar, only disturbed by the sounds of their own walkers and footfalls and the occasional distant echoes of battle. The clouds rolled in around them and hid the sun, shrouding their path in obscuring sheets of cold rain. It was a different darkness, a different foe, but it was the same war. He gripped
That
his
can't be
blaster
good.
more tightly, body gloves squeaking slightly under the
This is
plates of his
concerning for
battle
them.
armor.
Those look
He
very
was
chaotic.
bred for war, bred from war. A sliver, a shard of the galaxy's greatest fighter, hammered into the shape of a soldier. Yet, he still always felt this. The dread, the yawning mouth of death taunting him, his every step forward a promise that his short life was growing shorter and shorter. He wondered if those sensations, those feelings of fear, were meant to sharpen him, to make him stronger, make him better at surviving, or at preventing the enemy's survival. Sando couldn't know, but he hoped it was the case, particularly when the captain began to issue new orders, orders the clone had heard issued many times before, to platoons further up the line of the column. They were being redeployed, being sent to the vanguard. Dark rumbles of thunder framed the orders as they were given, like ominous portents, and once more Sando could hear Death's grinning, hungry mouth taunt him. "This time, Sando, I'll have you this time."
Oh,
It
that's
chuckled in his mind.
awful. That's awful.
He gave
it sounds,
no response, instead saluting with his...
You know what it reminds me of? It makes me think of what when Ahsoka was looking into the Electro Priest's mind, and she saw the demon, and it was saying like, "Oh, I'll get you. I'll get you." I'll get you one day. That's what it sounds like. We got a little chaos action here. The warp is pretty smooth currently, but I think the Imperium is gonna mess it up, so we'll see.
brothers and following his orders. They picked up their pace, marching ahead of the column for a few minutes before a couple of modified ISP speeders pulling hover sleds arrived. He and his squad boarded one, cramming themselves in and taking their seats on the uncomfortable, thin planks of metal that served the purpose, strapping in. The clones slid their long rifles between their legs, holding them there, barrels in their hands and aimed up as the ISPs tore off at a brisk pace, jerking them all and making Sando fear that the sleds would topple, as he did every time. And as every time before, the repulsor lifts mounted to the sleds compensated for the pitch, aligning them behind the speeders as a city blurred around them, rain smacking their helmets. They were briefed over their comms, the voice of a sergeant loud and clear as he relayed what had been told to him over to the rest of the squads. Their mission was simple. They were joining the rest of their platoon in a flanking assault on an enemy hardpoint. Some of the imps had assembled a competently placed gun nest and were holding well past the point they should have been overtaken. Despite their relatively low numbers, casualties from the vanguard forces which had attempted to storm the position had been disproportionately high, and the Imperials showed no mercy to the fractured remains of their blunted assaults. Sando and the rest were going to take a building that the Imperials had placed their backs to and split into two teams. Team 1 would set charges behind the imps, while Team 2 took the roof and rappelled down on top of the enemy positions, firing all the while. It was imperative that they crushed this resistance on this attempt, as anything else would either stall the advance or force the main columns to become engaged as they came into contact with the hardpoint. Sando hoped this was the reason a whole platoon was being sent in, and not just a few squads, or, better yet, some commandos. Whatever the reason, they were disembarking near the rear of the targeted building all too soon. The troopers stood and armed, preparing, squads separating to different entry points, priming breaching charges, checking windows, and synchronizing mission timers. Sando found himself pressed against the white steel of the wall beside a window. The glass had been scanned, brittle, so he knew he'd get through it without any trouble. The countdown was snapped out into his ear and, swallowing once, he watched as his brothers smashed the window clear, before he propelled himself into motion. His armor protected him from the glass shards as he tossed himself over the lip of the breach and into the shadowed confines of the building.
Oh.
The sound of breaching charges rung out as he crossed,
see what
lights
happens
of
here.
dim, stormy gray lancing into the dark structure before rifle-mounted lights activated. He and his platoon stormed in, covering each other as they advanced at rapid pace. He came to the rectangular entrance into one hallway and checked, crisp lamplight illuminating the space ahead of his brothers as they passed him and continued in. And for the briefest moment, just a moment, Sando dared to hope that the Imperials had left the building vacant.
Yeah.
That they had
nope.
left their backs exposed.
Nope.
Then came the explosions. Sando was tossed back out of the hallway on a concussive wave, no more than a piece of errant phlegm coughed out of a dragon's throat. His mind was sent scattering, and while he never truly lost consciousness, he lay, stunned, motionless as chaos erupted around him. The imps had not relied on their minds alone to take care of all the clones, and drove into the stunned or destroyed point men of the Republic forces. Bright bursts of red and yellow light flashing down hallways and corralling the more numerous enemy squads away from their planned trajectories. Voices were shouting, clones and Imperials. Weapons fire heated the air and filled it with the sour fumes of spent munitions and scorched air. Distantly, he knew that they had been ambushed, that the Imperial hardpoint had been a trap. But those thoughts were difficult to grasp and keep, a recurring epiphany of the worst kind. After some time, how much Sando had no way to tell, he sat up slowly and looked around. The explosions had thrown him out of the hallway and into a room somewhere. The complex they were fighting in seemed to be some kind of office building, and he had collided with a desk, collapsing it and half burying himself in white paper. His body ached from hair to toenails, and he felt sick, but at the sound of the alien Imperial tongue, all those sensations began to bleach away. His translator was busted, so he had no way of knowing what the imps were saying as they drew nearer and nearer to the room. But he silently extricated himself from where he had landed and, ignoring the pained protest of his limbs, crouched by the open door, watching and listening in. Finding his visor cracked and thereby obscured, he removed his helmet and placed it down next to him as he waited and watched. The fighting was still going on, but it was farther away now, and this area had certainly fallen behind the enemy's line. Two Imperials were strolling down the hallway, speaking to each other and casually executing any clones they found still breathing as they did.
Yikes,
Sando felt rage build in his chest, but looking around, failed to spot where his rifle was resting. The two imps came to stand near his door, pausing just beyond. A trooper, half buried in the rubble from the wall beside him, groaned as they stepped onto the detritus which hid him. With a gesture and a chuckle, one of the soldiers kicked away some of the collapsed and shattered panels, exposing the Republic trooper's cracked helmet. "Help!" The clone groaned. The Imperials looked at each other and shrugged, one leveling his laser rifle down towards the clone. But it was the man behind him who cried out, the Imperial gasping out a scream of alarm before his breath was driven out of him by Sando's tackle.
Nice.
The clone pinned the man to the wall, grabbing him roughly by his thick shoulder blade and pulling. It was in this way that he was able to spin the man around in time to catch the other Imperial's volley of energy blasts, which had been fired not down at the injured clone, but instead back towards Sando himself. The soldier cried out in despair as he inadvertently shot his comrade, not killing the man, but further stunning the breathless Imperial Sando held locked in his arms. The clone wasted no time, reacting on instinct more than training, using his left hand to find the wounded man's holstered sidearm, yanking it free and pulling the trigger. Sando almost cried out for joy as he found the weapon without its safety engaged, spears of red light punching into the other soldier's chest and face.
That's pretty good luck.
The dying man fired with a spray of his own red light, but falling to one knee, Sando managed to catch all the shots that would have struck him on his human shield. He smirked for just a moment as the man before him dropped to the ground, trigger still squeezed and discharging lasers into the wall beside him for several seconds. But soon, the clone hissed instead and tossed off his Imperial human shield. The man had done nothing to him. He was quite thoroughly dead after the last volley. His body, riddled with so many shots, had become so hot that Sando had started to feel his neck and shoulder heating painfully. He took only a moment then to pull his fallen brother out from the rubble and lay him within the room among the papers. But Sando could hear more of the imps coming. He grit his teeth, swirls of dread and rage and raw hatred flitting through him. And then the insanity took him. The insanity that always took him when he managed to get his blood up and pumping. He hated that it had to come from this, but once it came at all, he couldn't help the emotions
He's got his own black rage going on.
Some of his brothers inherited their gene father's natural talent with machines. Others, his penchant for creative thinking and command. And others still harbored Django's keen eyes or his thirst for victory at any cost. But Sando, in these moments, felt that he had inherited much more than any of his brothers had. Django had been the most lethal bounty hunter in the history of the galaxy. And Sando had inherited his father's killer instincts. Those impulses, desires, and emotions which compelled one being to simply understand how to end a life, and by what means to do it. He
Blood
struggled
for the
to
blood
explain
god.
it to his brothers, and they struggled to understand quite what it was about him that made him the way he was. But Sando had no difficulty in displaying it, not once he was in the zone, so to speak. And here, behind enemy lines, alone, without his weapon and injured, he was most certainly feeling as though he had found his zone once more. The clone looked around, eyes razor sharp. He spotted his fallen brother's blaster rifle, intact, and ignored it, bending down beside the two Imperial corpses and yanking gear from their limp bodies. Grenades, a rifle, 2 pistols, and a long, wickedly curved knife came away with his red-tinged hands.
Yeah,
and he
that's a
wasted no
good
time
plan.
in strapping them around his body. Gear in place, rifle in hand, Sando paused to listen, feeling the hard thrum of lethal intention pulling on every fiber of his finite being. It took him a second or 3, but soon he had a sense of where the Imperials were, and moved off in that direction. He crept, staying low, legs burning as he maintained a steady stride, weapon up and ready. He saw that there was a flashlight attached to the end of his gun, but didn't activate it. His eyes had become accustomed to the darkness by now. And for that, he was able to see the flashes of muzzle fire clearly in the doorway of his destination, as well as hear the sounds of combat. He came closer and closer, and within his mind an ocean of thoughts swirled, clawing at the purity of his purpose. Run! His animal instincts screamed into him. But it was not to those instincts that Sando was listening. Within every Mandalorian lived a beast, a fiend, a demon of war. It was a ghastly thing, a killing thing, and it was to this thing that Sando now lent all his attention. And as he crossed the final few feet to the entryway that led to the battle, it screamed its first comprehensible order into his ear, its ringing command driving out all other thoughts of any other kind. Run! And he obeyed, picking up speed and almost throwing himself through the doorway. Awaiting him on the other side was a 2-story lobby, open and tiered. The Imperials were engaging a retreating clone force here, having taken most of the room already. Emerging from behind them, Sando squeezed down on his desire to roar with all his might, the killer in him tamping down on the natural reaction. Instead of yelling a war cry, he dashed behind the first cluster of Imperials and opened fire.
Yeah,
the weapon in his arms kicked oddly, the recoil soft, like an exhaling breath, nothing close to what he got from a DC-16. And that helped him drill holes into the backs of their heads as he sighted it down. It didn't fire like a blaster either, issuing a spray of red and orange bolts, like an indication laser being set to strobe. The way they seemed to bounce off the back of the Imperials' helmets, at least for the first few shots, made the weapon feel strangely weak in his hands. Yet, when he corrected his aim for the last of the 3, sighting his exposed neck, the clone was shocked to find the Imperial handedly decapitated in less time than it took for him to realize what had happened. It wasn't weak, he realized. It wasn't any kind of firearm at all. It was a death laser gun. Like a strobing flashlight of pure murder, made into the shape of a rifle. He knew not why.
A strobing flashlight of pure murder. Accurate, though. Accurate. Accurate.
But the realization tore a grin into his face, though neither did he pause to consider it, moving quickly to the next two Imperials. Perhaps because of his speed, or the fact that the gun he was firing was their own, the Imperials had yet to realize the wolf in their midst, and he caught the next two unprepared. He scythed off the head of the first just as the second turned around, sliding out the weapon's cartridge as he did and starting to reload even as his eyes met Sando's. "Hostilit!" He started to scream before Sando filled his jaws with atomizing light. But dead as the man was, his call had succeeded, and the dozen or so Imperials in the room swung to regard the commotion. He was moving even before then, all too aware of how easy a target he was in white armor, and using the smooth steel pillars on the Imperial side of the room to hide from the spatters of returning fire those that spotted him sent his way. Sando kept his head down, running in a crouch and raising his gun, firing it over his head and providing his own covering fire for the second or two he needed to close the distance to the next pair of soldiers. He passed the last pillar and came into naked view of the two, one of whom was still firing at Sando's brothers on the opposite side of the room.
This is rough. It's so tough. I don't know who to root for. Like, I love the Imperium, and I think they're gonna win. I think their biggest issue is that they don't have, like, a ton of, like, they're not gonna be able to resupply as easily, or if at all. And I'm like, I don't know who I want to win, because moments like this I'm like, oh yeah, get him, buddy, get him, get those guys, like, it's super cool. And then I'm like, but I want I'm so torn. I don't know. And it's just difficult because it's good storytelling on both sides, and I'm just anyways.
While the other had his gun leveled at the approaching clone. The trooper felt his teeth almost crack, pushing his legs so hard he was sure his limbs would burst, all the while knowing that if they didn't, it still would not be enough. The Imperial opened fire, and Sando reflexively tossed the rifle in his arms at the enemy. Everything seemed to slow, time grinding down to a halt. He saw the rifle spinning in the air, saw the bolts of light, lightning quick even now, streaking towards him. But as the first bolts hit the rifle, they did not budge it, they only burned it. It wasn't until the scorched air collapsed around the impact shots that any actual physical force was applied to the gun in the air. And in those fragments of seconds, it ate too many of the soldiers' shots, and Sando found himself shielded in the shadow of the gun he'd thrown, even as he drew the two pistols from his waist. The weapon burst in the air, and Sando smelled the unpleasant waft of burning plastic and scorched meat as the two red lances caught him, one on his left shoulder and the other on his left leg. The armor there blackened, lightened, but held as he leapt. Sando drove for the man's knees, colliding with his shins instead, and causing the Imperial to collapse, pitched forward over the clone as Sando raised his weapon. From the ground, he opened fire, spraying the other occupied soldier with twin barrels of red death.
Yikes.
The man dropped, but not before the first soldier on top of Sando spun himself around, kicking the clone hard in the head and sending his aim wide. Likely, in this instant, range and rate of fire made up for his split vision. Pain brought him back to focus, the soldier having twisted onto his back while still on top of Sando, firing shots from his laser gun down at the clone's exposed head. A bolt of heat scoured the right side of Sando's face, and he ducked his head, avoiding the direct hits which would have more than burned him. He almost hesitated, but in the midst of pain and fear, training took over. He dropped his pistols and half spun, half reached around as quickly as he could, grasping the man's legs and then twisting them both, flipping over hard so that he was on top and the Imperial beneath him and now face down, unable to shoot for a few precious moments. Sando rolled up towards the man's back, pinning him to the cold ground with one arm while his other hand reached for the dagger he had taken earlier. The Imperial beneath him did not pause or cease resistance, however, curling his legs under him and rising in a rush, both slamming the back of his hard helmet into the clone's face and pitching him off. The Imperial soldier scrambled forward as Sando fell back, gasping as he pulled his knife free of the belt holster he'd taken, raising it up. But the man was already too far from him, collapsing against the pillar and using it for support as he spun around, backsliding up as he stood, gun barrel rising towards Sando's chest. On his knees and barely able to see through his distorted vision, the clone threw his dagger, aiming for the man's face.
Get him!
The honed blade hummed through the air, its monomolecular edge slicing past atoms before burying itself a half-inch into the hard, torso-encompassing armor over the Imperial's chest. Not enough.
Oh,
Not nearly
man.
close enough. Sando let his arms drop limp, barely able to see the soldier smirk past his own blurred but clearing sight.
Cadia Suscepit!
The man growled, and then
Did he just say Cadia stands? Did he just say Cadia stands?
and his head burst, a bright blue blaster bolt taking him from the left side. He dropped like a sack of drowned
Rip.
porgs, and Sando, who could barely register his continued existence, found himself gasping and alive. He looked around, eyes focusing, and began to understand. As he had made his assault, so too had the battle around them been persisting and progressing. Though the Imperials had been blindsided by Sando's rampage, the clones fighting them had noticed him from the start. Emboldened
Nice.
by his assault and aided by the quick felling of 5 of the enemy's soldiers, several of the other Republic troopers had taken the initiative, charging in through the gap and beginning a building flanking maneuver. A clone ran to where Sando knelt, offering him a hand, which the trooper took with a wince. He could feel the burns on his face beginning to assert their reality, and was relieved when the man handed him a back-to-pack. "Cote, brother!" said the clone, and though he wore a helmet still, Sando could tell that the trooper was smiling beneath it. "Voden!" Sando said in response, taking one of the fallen Imperial's rifles and setting his jaw. The clone took only a few moments' rest to apply his back-tuck before charging in to aid in the fight. Though the Imperial resistance was stubborn, he and the clones he'd found managed to plunge deep into the gap they'd created,
Yikes.
cut off, but with a
R.I.P.
clear shot to their
the
mission
Imperials.
objective. The clone troopers of the Republic grimly pressed on. They had been 3/4 of the way to their destination when Sando and his men got word of other squads breaking through. The Imperials appeared to be withdrawing bit by bit. Though the other clones rallied at the thought of being the first at the scene, not the only ones, Sando kept his optimism in check. The imps were rabid. Every last one.
Yeah, they
and
are.
he shuddered to think what could actually be happening to force such forces into a withdrawal. He began to feel as he had when he'd awoken to find his squad missing or dead, and his chances of survival essentially foregone. And that, Sando knew, was not a good thing. Yet they reached the position without further conflict, locating the precise place on the wall where they were to set their charges. Sando had the men spread out and form a small perimeter, while the demo specialists had their fun with the shaped charges. The clone had advised them to lay it on thick. He hoped they could take out the imp hardpoint just by the force of their entry, if possible. The best case scenario would be for them to be able to create their own exit through their former position, and the worst would be to get caught between that hardpoint's back and a dedicated assault from the imps still in the building. It was at this time that Sando and the others learned that the roof access teams were almost in position and that their reinforcements were only minutes away. The clone almost dared to relax, and then it started happening.
Uh-oh.
At first, it wasn't obvious, but when 10 minutes rolled by and no sign of their reinforcements had arrived, the clones began checking in just to be safe. Gone. Half the squads were just gone. Everyone was ordered to check in and for only short intervals to be taken in between. But this only highlighted the dread-inducing speed of the phenomenon as clones continued to vanish. Sando's platoon, or what was left of it, acted quickly, moving to seal off as many of the incoming access points as they could, closing them and rigging them with traps as quickly as they could manage.
Oh no.
All the while, small hints and haunting pieces of the puzzle began to emerge over the radios. The sounds of thundering weapons could be heard, drawing nearer and nearer.
Oh no.
And the incomplete screams and war cries of the assailed began to bleat out from their open comms. The clones managed to lock down a great deal of the surrounding rooms, powering doors with spare energy cells and barricading what was left, until they managed to narrow down the most likely approach to a single short hallway. Sando and half the men were tasked with holding it until the explosives were all set and lit. And in that darkness, beside his brothers, he waited. But despite how much time seemed to drag as he listened to their soft, shuffling and nervous breaths, even he realized that they were not left waiting for long. Thunk, thunk, thunk.
Oh no. Is that a space marine I hear? Is that a space marine? Nilsa, thank you so much for subscribing. Thank you so much.
The unmistakable sound of hard metal footfalls
Oh,
began
you
to
guys are
fill the
toast.
space.
You're toast.
The acrid smell
nice
of weapons
knowing you,
fire
Sando.
slowly gave way to the heady scent of
Voice
alien
marine.
incense. Sando could see it. The thin lines and trails of smoke growing thicker and thicker from the thunk, thunk, thunk. He swallowed hard, feeling his heart pounding painfully in his chest. He could feel the vibrations in the ground, just ever so slightly, as the specter
And those
of
are not
death
the good
approached.
vibrations.
This time, Sando. I told you I'd have you this time. Whispered the wet lips of death. Bitter sweat slicked the inside of his bodysuit, and he gripped the Imperial deathlight more tightly. He knelt behind a set of overturned desks, weapon braced and sighted down the long hallway. Thunk, thunk, and then a pause. The clones froze, held their breaths, and waited. But as before, they did not have to wait long before the angels descended upon them, and Sando was tested against an untestable foe.
Yikes, bro. Sorry, buddy.
Obi-Wan ran his tongue over
Yes!
his top lip, tasting sweat, blinking it out of his eyes as he slowly circled the Imperial warrior before
Yeah.
him. The man was monstrous in his powered armor, and though the manifestation of might he had begun the battle with had faded to nothing, the evident strength he still retained lent weight to the shadowed grin he bore. The Jedi Master could feel his heart beating heavily in his chest. Heavily, but not rapidly.
Yes.
The fight had gone on, so he had discarded the luxury of panic and the indulgence of uncertainty.
Yeah. Oh,
Just doing what he had done already
Obi-Wan is so based. I love him.
had required all of his focus. Required that he embrace Soresu in its entirety. Even that had barely been enough. Now he stood, a lone knight against a monster, and he would not fear. The inhuman warrior
Yes.
seemed to warp forward.
He's doing the pose.
No muscles, no joints moving or even twitching in the sudden lunge. Looming wide and tall before Obi-Wan. The sudden transportation was almost enough to shock the Jedi to weakness. A thing which would have proven lethal as the Space Marine swung down his stave in a straight, thundering strike. The Jedi Master had discarded all expectations, however, merely accepting all new things as they occurred. His animal mind shrieking within the containment of his enforced tranquility. He caught the weapon on his, letting it slide down to one side in a silken parry, leaping forward with the same movement. His lightsaber followed the stave, pinning it below Obi-Wan as he propelled himself towards the Marine's face and kicked, aiming for the monster's nose. The Master's eyes grew wide then as
I'm sorry, this still, as he's about to get a foot to the face, it's a big, the foot's kind of big compared to how big Space Marines are, but still.
he watched, shock spilling into his demeanor despite himself, his heel landing not upon the Astartes' smirking face, but in the man's waiting palm. He had released the stave with one hand as he swung.
He's like,
the swing itself
"Let
being
me
no
catch
more
your
than
foot."
a trick, a feint leading to this moment. The
I hope Obi-Wan does not like his leg, cause he is about to have it broken.
Marine gripped the heel in his left hand, squeezing, crushing, and sighed in soft disappointment as his fingers crumpled the boot utterly flat. Obi-Wan reeled back, having slid his foot out of the boot in the last second before it was crushed.
That was fast.
His freed foot feeling cool as the air of the Auri made contact
Dang.
with his slick sock.
Oh.
The Jedi backed off, a single sweat-laden footprint trail following him as he did. I am not the first user of Soresu that you've encountered, Obi-Wan concluded.
No, you are not.
The Marine agreed.
At least I assume you are not. I do not know this style of fighting by a name, but your Luminara was quite proficient in it. It is, in fact, the reason that she was the last one left alive.
Oh, dang.
It is an enduring method of fighting, but it cannot conquer me. Soon I'll have you just as I had her, with very similar results in the end.
Oof.
The Astartes added a moment later, as the circling began anew. Maybe, said the Jedi Master. He leapt forward then, breaking with the convention of his style and thrusting with his saber, sucking in the force in a surge of speed and strength he could maintain for but an instant. The maneuver appeared eerily similar to the Space Marine's own initial attack, though they were each accomplished in entirely novel fashions unrelated to the other. Nonetheless, the attack had a similar effect, forcing the Space Marine to snap up a parry, savagely hooking the Jedi saber with his staff and pulling him in. Obi-Wan was forced to choose between releasing his saber or being dragged into the pull of the Marine, and the warrior's free driving fist, which was much as he had planned it. Allowing himself to be pulled forward, Obi-Wan drew the saber he had found on the floor before the meeting with the Imperial warrior.
That's just Luminars.
Its bright yellow blade flickered
it's
to
not
life in a
Luminars.
hand the Space Marine had thought free of weapons. And Safran suddenly found himself trapped by his own maneuver, the deceitful strike having tricked him into his own folly. Seeing only one way through, Safran's eyes blazed blue in his skull, pulsing and flaring like twin suns going nova. He bellowed a roar which shook the bones of those present, and instead of withdrawing the fist he had planned to use to cave in Kenobi's skull, he pushed even more power and energy into it, and punched forward with all his might.
Oh no!
As the Jedi lanced into the fist with his yellow saber, the Space Marine was suddenly sheathed in a radiating cloak of power, and his fist, likewise overlaid by the field of energy, caught the saber and stopped it in place without being pierced. Whirlwinds burst from the contact as the skill of the Jedi and the will of the Kyber Crystal collided with the direct touch of the librarian's mind.
That's a lot.
Light flared in expanding bursts, and it was all Safran could do to keep his feet under him as he pushed against the saber's will to destroy his limb. Blood trickled in small streams from his nose, but he had broken Eldari Farseers on the breadth of his will before. And compared to that mind war, this was as nothing. Those were the thoughts he held close as he roared once more with breath he did not have. His voice a demonic quake of unsound. The saber which screeched and bit against his fist seemed to bend and separate into four struggling streams of power. The yellow light suddenly flushing deep, unbidden crimson before the hilt burst in the Jedi's hand. The Space Marine grinned in savage triumph, the expression meeting his face mere milliseconds before Kenobi's now sock-sheathed heel met his nose. Crunch! Safran spun away as Kenobi kicked off.
He got hit with
coming
a sock.
down a short distance to the Space Marine's right.
He didn't wear a shoe. He got him with the foot that was not wearing a shoe. Lovely.
Landing in a small clatter of armor and rising as he discarded the half-molten saber from his smoking, burnt hand. The Jedi pushed the pain of his singed limb aside, flooding it with the Force to ensure that it would continue to serve him. The Space Marine turned to face him, nose crooked, a wide, toothy grin stretched across his face.
Amidst an order of witchling waifs, I am finding you to be a uniquely delightful challenge. It gratifies me that it is a human who ultimately stands before me and brings me some measure of pause.
The Imperial said, leaning his stave against his shoulder as he reached up carefully with his gauntleted hands. Obi-Wan cringed visibly as the Space Marine straightened his own nose, snorting out globs of blood afterwards in an utterly casual fashion.
Yeah, he's got to do that because they heal so fast, so he's got to set it now before that sucker heals bad.
The Jedi Master reset his stance and spoke once more. I can see you are tiring, Space Marine. You are indeed built for war, and between the first group you encountered and my stand here, you've gotten one. But will you win it? The Jedi shook his head as if to answer for the Astartes. Trust me, I have defeated weapons like you before, and I'll do so again as many times as I need to. The Astartes raised his eyebrow at that, a gesture Kenobi was only able to infer from the movement of his cheeks. The upper half of his face now wreathed in shadow, his eyes dimming once more, though the blue light there never vanished.
You've defeated Space Marines in the past?
He asked. Not as such, no, but I've defeated men made for war. Men who embraced both foul sorcery and technology to become killers. Men made by dark masters to be insurmountable in the field of battle. And I've bested each one, and I best them every time, said the Jedi. The Space Marine did not respond right away, watching with his unsettling, smoldering eyes as they circled one another. Obi-Wan was not rushing, taking his time to look for openings, seek his chance.
I can sense that you are not lying. At least, not from your point of view.
Wow.
The Space Marine rumbled at length.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you can believe something. Doesn't mean it's, like, true. I don't know how well Obi-Wan would actually do against this librarian. I think regular Space Marine, he's probably fine. I think this would be a difficult fight for him. But still, just because you believe it doesn't mean it's true.
So, I shall not lie either. Yes, I am somewhat worn down by all the fighting that has come before now. But Jedi, you do not yet understand the kind of war I was created to fight.
Yeah, see.
For you, fighting for minutes, hours, even days at a time are skills to be remarked, to be honed.
And he's like, I fought for years, decades, centuries.
To you, and to most of your order, today has brought you to the pinnacle of your strength, and perhaps beyond it. Am I wrong?
The Jedi said nothing, which the Imperial clearly figured told him everything. The Psyker paused and shook his head before looking up at the Jedi Master with an expression which very nearly bordered on pity.
To me, Jedi, this war is just another xenocide. Not only is all you see before you
For me, it was just a Tuesday. This is just another in the list of many things that I've completed. Dang.
the definition of routine, but if I had to point out an aspect of this conflict that makes it notable, I would be forced to concede that the only novelty I've felt in this fight before now is how pathetically unprepared the Republic was for a true, determined enemy.
Yeah, they're
Obi-Wan
fighting each
grit
other.
his teeth, apprehension flooding his gut and turning to fury before he seized it. This man was boasting, but that did not mean he was lying as well. Indeed, from everything Obi-Wan could
Yeah.
sense, he wasn't doing any such thing. He was barely even barbing his sentiment. You boast well enough, I'll give you that much.
Yeah, he's kind of like, bro, this is normal for me. I'm sorry. I fight scarier things than you. Thank you, Thomas, for the super chat. Obi-Wan would definitely struggle with a librarian if Space Marines are regular tanks. Librarians are an entire tank division. Yeah, with warp foolery, definitely.
The Jedi. But talking big is not the same as making good on it. And there is nothing you can say that will make me abandon my democracy or my
Okay.
order.
That's fine.
The Astartes' broad smile
like,
returned
he
at
can
that,
follow
evidently
through.
pleased with Kenobi's defiance.
Good.
Oh.
Then I shall face you fully.
He said, leaving Obi-Wan in silence. The Space Marine's grin only grew deeper at that, and he stopped circling, stepping forward instead.
Do not mistake me, heretic. You are skilled enough to hold my focus, so let me be clear and honest as I hold theirs. Let those Jedi around us who may yet live to flee carry with them this knowledge. I am now going to crush you, break you, and bend you to the will of the Emperor.
Oh.
Those here will go with the full knowledge that you came against me with every strength you could muster. And if they are allowed to flee, they will do so burdened with the undeniable proof that it was all not nearly enough.
Ooh.
Are you seriously still searching for?
That is interesting. Brainwash Obi-Wan, or even Obi-Wan as a paste to the ground. That is not good.
it? I thought you were supposed to be good at this, whined one of the nearby clones. Echo had no idea who, he was too busy, focusing too much to pay any attention to their banter. The cyborg was sitting in what remained of Admiral Trench's command chair, a thick cable linking his access probe to the chair's systems. Though he was seated and his body seemed relaxed, his face did not reflect that. Brows furrowed, sweat creasing the wrinkles on his head, it was clear he was not having an easy time of it. I am good at this. A droid wouldn't last 5 seconds inside code this badly ruptured. Sorting through all of this is like stuffing a Wookiee, a Zabrak, and a Deveroni into a blender and trying to sort the teeth from the horns, he said through clenched teeth.
What the heck?
Excuses. The clone jibed half-heartedly. A few chuckled nervously as well, but none did so earnestly, not even the clone who had spoken the joke. They were all tense and coping, all fully aware of what had happened with the commander, and that even after recovering her, Ahsoka's condition had remained critical. They knew she would likely pull through. That Bacta, combined with her well-worn grit, would carry her over any hurdle these injuries could pose. They knew that, but still, they all worried. Even Echo.
Yeah,
But he shoved
homies.
it all aside. Somewhere, lost in all this ruptured data and rated systems, was the system control for the bomb on an axis. He knew they couldn't hold the ship, not indefinitely. And already he had been forced to detour from his search in order to close bulkheads and seal off the captured Separatist vessel from the Imperial vessel which was adhered to it. Ray shields and Durasteel. But for how long could those barriers hold against the dedicated breaching attempt? Echo pushed that thought out of the way as well. All that mattered in the end was finding the controls for the bomb. That was all. So it was that even as the doors into the bridge opened, Echo continued to work. That even as the newcomer strode in behind him, drawing the attention of all other clones, he did not notice. "How's the search coming, Echo?" asked Ahsoka.
Honey, I think you're still probably really messed up. You maybe shouldn't, push yourself.
Clone jerked, blinking, only half able to see through his own true eyes, sunken into the system as he was. Still, it was enough sight that he could see her when he turned to look to his right. She was alive, though certainly not unscathed. One of her arms was bound in a sling, and though she had received Bacta treatments, her limp suggested that she would benefit from a cast as well. Scorch marks marred the skin around her face, and her montrals were slightly discolored, bruised. Still, it was good to see her, and he gave her a brief grin before returning his focus. "Not as well as your recovery, Commander. Imps completely scrambled the system, tore it apart searching for usable intel. I'm having trouble navigating anything in here," he said. Ahsoka sighed. A gentle gust of air passed lips lightly caked in her own blood. And she shook her head. "I thought as much. You can stop searching, Echo. I don't think we are going to find it. It probably isn't even on an axis anymore," she said. "What? Why?" the clone asked. "Because I spoke with that captive priest before he escaped, and he told me a lot about these people, and how they think. More than he probably intended. These tech priests, they would be more interested in how our bomb works than in adding it to their arsenal. It honestly might be more permissible in their religion to take our technology apart than to actually use it," the former Jedi said. "Are you sure about that, Commander? It's not every day you come across a planet cracker." Ahsoka laughed at that, and the sound chilled Echo down to his bones. "Maybe not for us," she said, and left it at that. Echo nodded and began to withdraw himself from the system. It was then that he noticed something wrong. It was not obvious, not at first, but when he finally caught the change, it sent his cyberdized mind into a frenzy. "Commander, the imps aren't trying to get in anymore," Echo said, straining to control his voice. Ahsoka raised an eyebrow at that. "Not
Because they're gonna detonate the bomb on the ship. That's what's gonna happen. Oh no. Okay, I will be right back. I drank all my Mountain Dew. So, I will be right back and we'll finish this episode. Just give me 1 second, okay?
quite grasping what he...
Oh. I'm back. Alright, let's continue.
meant, though Echo was already taking action. He began clearing the airlocks, severing the umbilicals that the Imperials had connected all over the ship. They aren't trying to get in? Asked the former Jedi.
Nope.
What do you mean? Echo grimaced, sweat sliding from his slightly gray skin and running over the rigid steel of his cybernetics. Ahsoka, I mean that the imps aren't banging on the airlocks or trying to cut their way in. In fact, I think that they've largely retreated from the ship. They aren't trying to make holdouts, he said. So what does that mean? Ahsoka asked, clearly alarmed, though the origin of her tension came more from Echo's tone than from his actual words. It means, Echo said, struggling with the final ties that bound the two vessels together, that they don't want the ship anymore! He almost yelled.
Yep.
His words proved prophecy. For the next few moments, warning alarms and sirens began to flicker and blare across the bridge. The ship rocked suddenly, and the sound of metal screeching could be heard by everyone aboard. What's happening right now, Echo? Ahsoka yelled as she braced herself against a nearby console with her good hand. Weapons locks! The Imperial ship is targeting us with its broadside-mounted weapons! Echo called back. Ahsoka paled ever so slightly. Get us out of here, Echo! She ordered. Already on it! He called back. The ship screeched again, and the rocking that came with the sound was almost enough to shake Ahsoka to the floor. As many clones were. I can't promise we'll take all the ship with us, though! He added a moment later. Ahsoka nodded and tapped her comm piece. Rex, rally the 501st and bring everyone to the bridge, prisoners included, she ordered. Aye, Commander, he called back over the earpiece. No sooner had the response been received than another quake shook the ship, causing the lights to flicker all across the bridge. Got it, we're loose, Echo called. Deploy the countermeasures, Ahsoka ordered as she hung on to the console. Roger, Echo called back. He did what he could, activating the sporadic systems of the ship's defenses as the engines, or what was left of them, burned at full. The effort was just enough to avoid the cascading row of cannons that had faced them, but was not quite enough to avoid the shoulder-mounted laser battery that the Imperial warship had prepared. The beam struck the rear of the ship, mangling the pathetic veil of shields that Echo had managed to erect before impact. Engines are gone! Echo yelled. How much? Ahsoka called back. Everything, he said. Ahsoka grit her teeth and looked out through the massive transparent canopy of the bridge. Axum hung outside like a false promise, never to be reached. But Echo saw something different. He triggered the maneuvering thrusters and began rolling the ship on its side, angling towards the planet. Ahsoka saw the disorienting tilt begin and looked over at the clone, confusion clearly writ on her face. Echo, what are you... she began. They might fire at their own forces and they will definitely fire at us, the clone began to say. But they won't fire on the temple if I can bring us down that way. With just maneuvering thrusters? Ahsoka asked. We are trapped, Commander. No way out, but it's not my first time. In moments like these, the only way I've ever made it through is by asking myself a very specific question, he said, sinking more and more of himself into the wounded ship. His vision blurred and vanished. His skin became steel, brushed against the void and hateful heat of lethal wounds. His eyes became sensors, half functioning as the light atmosphere around them began to heat. His limbs became the burning maneuvering thrusters, clawing at space to escape the sights of the enemy weapons. And what question is that? Asked Ahsoka. What would General Skywalker do?
Yes! Yes, I called it! I called it! Yes! There we go. Psyker magic at it again. Welcome back to Things I Like to Predict. Yes! That was awesome. Anakin is a living war crime. Kind of. Wow. Wonderful. I was like, I don't know, that just seems like what would Anakin do? Maybe something like this. And I mean, he's not wrong. He is not wrong.
General Skywalker was trapped on a half-dying Providence class while stuck in the middle of an active battle. I know exactly what he would do, the clone said, a fierceness entering his voice which made it clear to the Togrutan commander that the clone fully expected to die in the attempt of this.
Yep.
She said nothing against it, for there was no other way she could see. Instead, she tightened her grip and asked, "So what do you think Anakin would do?" Echo allowed the insanity of the moment of his life to overwhelm his countenance. Half clone, half droid, half dying ship. He clenched his teeth in a manic grin as he answered, eyes wide and seeing nothing. He'd land it! He'd land it right on top of their fracking heads!
He would. See, this is the after talk episode. Yeah. Holy cow, it took us oh my gosh, that episode was an hour and 40 minutes long, and it took us 2 hours to watch the whole thing. I guess that's not too bad. Sure, let's watch another one.
Lazarus stood, watching as the already dim light around him dimmed further and further. The main body of the storm had rolled in, heavy and wet, soaking all beneath in a continuous blanket of falling rain. The haze it created lent the whole battlefield a ghostly, surreal quality. The three-legged tanks were burning, their fires defiant beneath the shrouds of suffocating rain, lending distant lights to the murk. The toy soldiers were running, regrouping with their larger force, like dread spirits fleeing the sight of the Emperor. They were massing, turning around from their initial assault on the bridge diversionary forces and wheeling about to face him and the other Calambians. It was, just as planned, the best case scenario. Except for one vital, oh so vital detail. The Imperium had lost the air battle above them, and while the engagements were persisting as the remaining air forces pulled out, soon there wouldn't be a single friendly eagle in the sky. At best, it meant that they would not be extracted. At worst, the enemy would soon bring more than rain down upon them.
It's Rain Man.
Major, what now?
Hallelujah.
Asked the soldier
it's
beside
Rain
him.
Man.
He took in a long breath, listening to the static in his earpiece, waiting. He watched the mass of angry, scowling Republic ghost soldiers drawing nearer and nearer. A mass of white and black, a rustling under the rumbling and rattling of the storm. He waited, tasting the rain on his lips, truly shocked at how clean it tasted. Like purified water, no aftertaste at all, in spite of the fact that this was a hive world. He blinked the rain out of his eyes
He's like,
and figured he could think
"The
of
water
worse
tastes good
places
here?"
to lie down and be still forever. Sir? He asked. Yes, right, the Major said, shaking his head. He tapped his earpiece, setting the frequency to all nearby channels. Eagles just lost the air. We aren't getting out by extraction, he said plainly. The words felt weird in his mouth, unreal. He knew what they must be thinking, knew what those who still had their senses would feel when they heard those words. So we all die now, or at least most of us. He knew they would be thinking that, and was proud in the scene that followed. Calambians stood or crouched, silent, still, living dead men held in the thrall of action, of battle. They were resolute, ready. They were true warriors, and Lazarus would not let them die, not without a struggle, not without a fight.
Very good, very cool.
As far as I'm concerned, Lazarus said to the Calambians, it's up to us to extract now. Tech priests, start creating cover and making hardpoints. Munition techs, get out there and rig these heretics a proper welcome. Everyone else, get to the ledge and start rappelling down. We need to go back the way we came, he said. He knew what he had just ordered was little better than attempting a holdout, maybe even worse. But from what Lazarus could see, this was their one and only chance. They would need to rappel down the side of the park structure all the way down to where they had started. Their ascension cables were not long enough to take them all the way there in one go, as they had not been long enough to reach the lip of the park ledge when fired from below. He and his men would need to stop and reset their lines 4 times. Some would make it all the way down before any shots were exchanged. Most would not.
Yikes.
Most would be caught in battle with the Republic's toy soldiers, and he knew it. And they knew it too. On the double, now! He added into his Vox a second later, and the Imperial soldiers began to move out en masse. Some were already at the lip, mostly the snipers and heavy fire support. They began strapping on their ascension gear right away, and were going down the side of the park in short order. Lazarus expected them to leave their gear behind, but most of the throne-damned gunheads were too stubborn to do that much, and insisted on taking time to pack it all in and take it along. Lazarus was pulled from cursing their choices by the necessity to be more concerned with his own. Inaccurate blue shots began to fall into the backs of the retreating Calambians, chasing them in messy, encompassing swarms of blue light. The Major wheeled about to put some shots downwind of the enemy just in time for their war cry to become audible through the rain and thunder. The sight and sound which greeted him chilled his blood and had him turning back
It's
around
all like
and doubling
the same
his
voice.
pace. The clones were roaring, a persistent, horrible wail of rage, of thousands of identical voices crying out for bloodshed. The force of charging clones was like an armed avalanche, outnumbering his men by so much that soon even their distant shots began to thicken the air such that accuracy no longer mattered. Damn it! Cover fire! Someone help me with cover fire! Lazarus yelled into his Vox as he slid down behind some wreckage, the smoldering remains of a downed ship, and began spraying shots of his las rifle into the charging mass. He was gratified when he saw more and more men joining in, and that gratification became relief as he saw the clones starting to slow, seeking cover of their own and breaking away from their headlong charge of running fire. Stopping their headlong assault bought more time for more men to make it to the lip. But the situation was becoming everything he feared quickly. The lip was so exposed and bare that anyone setting up to descend was left vulnerable while doing so. Already, he and most of his men were within running distance of the ledge, but going for it was like singling yourself out for death, and few were attempting it, most trying to break up and clear some of the enemy first. But the situation was growing more dire, not less, as the clones swarmed in greater numbers and assembled into effective firing positions, vastly outnumbering his own forces. Some were making it out, but they needed some kind of distraction or proper fire break, otherwise this battle would only slide further into disaster. "Get some grenaders ready! Fire everything you've got on my mark!" Lazarus yelled to the sergeant nearby. "Burning throne, fine, but grenaders aren't gonna cut it, Major!" The sergeant yelled back, face
All the
smeared
different
with the park's
curses
mud.
make me laugh.
"What would you suggest I deploy? Basilisk support?" Lazarus called back sarcastically, popping up from his cover to unload a rain of red lances. His last gun steamed, and he ducked back down just before a volley of blue bolts pinged and sizzled against the hull he chose to hide behind. "I'd settle for a dreadnought," the sergeant said back, turning away for a moment to listen to his vox. "The grenades are ready!" he yelled. Lazarus panted, looking over the lip of his cover and feeling like he was about to be overwhelmed, trampled and buried in a flood of white boots and cloned flesh. The onrushing army was coming dreadfully close now, a sloppy stampede of rage, but one unleashed where numbers precluded the need for tactics. He fired into their nearing faces and then ducked again, slamming his back against the cover and looking towards the ledge of the park. He had turned at the perfect moment, watching from start to finish as the wrath of the Emperor himself hauled itself on screeching limbs over the lip and into the mud, rising with a scream that was both human and machine. "Toss now?" the sergeant asked, still facing the battle. "Hold on! Almost time! And by the way, Sergeant!" "Yeah?" the man said back. "I don't got any dreadnoughts, but I have the next best thing for you," Lazarus said with a smile. Before the sergeant could ask anything more, his question was answered by the nearing and then passing shriek of the Sister Repentia. Body held rigid, crucified onto the manifestation of her penance.
That is terrifying.
The Colombian watched with wide, horror-rimmed eyes as the tortured woman and the war machine which carried her tore their way past the Imperial lines. Creaking, squealing limbs of cruel steel caked in old, bloody rust.
Oh, that is
clawed
a terrifying
and
sight
kicked
to
at the
behold.
dirt. The blind, screaming passenger at the center of the horrid device was wailing non-stop, desperate for bloodshed. The clones noticed it before it reached them, pouring blaster fire in its direction. But the frantic, agile movements of the wretchedly swift machine kept the passenger from taking any lethal damage as it swept blaster bolts out of the air with its right arm. The hand there was a twisted amalgamation of a power and chain fist,
I love that.
whirring
That's
loudly
amazing.
with bladed, blood-soaked claws. The white lines of the haphazard replicate ranks began to bend even before she made contact, and outright broke when the engine collided with their defenses. Her left arm belched a near-continuous stream of hellish promethium-fed fires from two dripping nozzles, clearing swaths of clones as they were doused in the hungry, weaponized fires. The fighting stalled as the clones recovered and began to reorient, the majority of their forces now focusing on the rabid penitent. But Lazarus did not let up just yet. "All right, launch grenades!" Lazarus barked at the man beside him.
So instead, now the Republic gets to see how truly insane the Imperium is? Yes. Absolutely insane. You would never expect a mech like this, but, yeah. It's messed up.
The sergeant nodded once and aped the command into his vox set. and the throaty thwomps of several grenade launchers sounded in near simultaneous succession. The explosives fell into the white-clad forces of the Republic, just as they began to attempt to surround and outflank the death-dealing pseudo-dreadnought that the sisters had lent to Lazarus before the battle had been joined. Hidden by the rain, the clones were mostly—
They're playing. He played Ave Maria. There's Ave Maria playing in the background. Listen.
caught off balance again as they were blasted by all manner of varied grenades. The Major spun to order a reload and second salvo, but turned to find another sister, the penitent's armored overseer, staring down at him. "Leave her," she said, neither crouching nor even leaning to hide behind cover. A few spatters of blue bolts darted for her, clinking and clattering off her shoulder plates, greaves, and head, each shot finding no purchase on the stalwart sister's black-powered armor. Each landed shot left no more than hissing trails of steam where the plate was heated under the rain. The red, glowing eyes of her almost owl-like helmet reminded him none too fondly of the Sister Superior, and briefly wondered at her own status. "Can't. That sister out there is tough, no doubt, but she will need to be extracted from that mess. She won't stand a chance at survival otherwise," he said to the armored battle priestess.
She is supposed to die.
"Exactly," she said, her tone deadpan, flat even by the standards of a voxed voice. "She is repenting her sins, and the only repentance for her is death.
Oh, I got chills.
This is understood by me, by my sisters, and by she herself," the sister added.
Oh, I'm getting chills.
"You want me to throw her away for a diversion?" Lazarus asked, far from above the tactic. "No, I want you to let her fulfill her penance, by one means or another," the sister said back. Lazarus shrugged in response. "Fine, but you better get down the side first," he said, tapping the sergeant's shoulder and muttering, "Signal the withdrawal on the double." The sister tilted her helm ever so slightly. "And why is that?" she would ask. "Because that penitent just died on your recommendation. So you better live to give witness to it, or Julia's going to maul me into ground grox meat. Now get moving. I'm only a major under the authority of the Sister Superior, so if that means anything to you, then take what I just said as an order," he said. The sister said nothing for a moment, rain pouring onto the dark, red-eyed shape.
You just do it, girly. Froggy, to answer your question, it's undetermined who's winning. This is by a YouTube creator called A Fan With Too Much Time, and he focuses less on which side would actually win and more on the lore and what makes sense. While like respecting both IPs. So he's making the most interesting story. Right now in this battle, the clone troopers and the Republic are winning this particular battle.
Hands clutching her bolter. "Now, sister!" he snapped, and she hesitated only a moment longer before nodding once. She raised her bolter, fired on full automatic, and emptied her mag. The weapon spat thunder and fire, sending ripples through the wet mud as the sister absorbed the recoil without apparent effort. She loaded another magazine, locking it into place with a slap of her armored palm, and spun around, making for the lip. Lazarus smiled at that and winced, the drugs wearing off again and allowing him to feel the cavalcade of burns and wounds which coated him like a youth soldier's merit badges. He spat bile and spun up, firing into the enemy before imitating the sister and running for the ledge of the park. "65 knew he should be taking control, knew he should be trying to rein in his frenzied, maddened forces. He knew, as did every man in his army, that they had failed, that the enemy had unthinkably offered up the vast majority of their forces as a bloody sacrifice, all to distract and draw 65 away.
Yes, you are correct, Thomas. Thank you for the super chat. Who's winning? We are, because it's a compelling narrative. You are correct. You are correct. We all are winning. Adepticon registration open today. Ooh. Oh, good to know. I don't think I have anything worth, like, to compete with. But that is good to know. Thank you. I should look into it. My phone's gonna die, so my lurker's gonna be the last 2 more minutes. No worries. I hope the power comes back for you. Hope the power comes back. Thank you for coming in and saying hi.
Away from the true head of their misbegotten spear.
Yeah, you can send me links.
And the knowledge of that failure quickly became a haze, an emotion, a unity of hatred, all of which called out for one thing: revenge. Even though 65 knew he should be drawing control back into focus, he found he could not. For he himself was trapped within this latest frenzy every bit as much as the lowliest of troopers who were joined in this charge. They had engaged the trenches at range, and he had only sent assault squads forward to clear them after he had perceived most of their enemy to have been felled by their onslaught. But no sooner had those first few advanced squads made contact with the survivors in the trench than they were being called back, the erupting forms of the sniper tanks drawing the attention of the larger force. The charge had begun as a desperate, hopeless attempt to reinforce and save the defending forces at the artillery line, but quickly became something far less constructive and far more vindictive. And, having been at the back of the line at the start of the battle, 65, charging and blasting with his DC-15A, was now near the lead. His fervor was only fueled by the knowledge that they would soon have full air support, imagining the hell he would order onto the Imperial fanatics with great relish. But before that, he was determined to kill several with his own rifle, and he was not the only one who thought so. The men fired as they found clear shots, even before they entered effective range. I can't wait to hear what he thinks of the engine. It's gonna be fantastic. It barely mattered. The power of the DC-15, combined with the number of them, made accuracy a negligible factor as the clones began to open fire, laying into the running imps, who seemed to be retreating back towards the ledge that they had cleared to perform their ambush. He smacked the side of his helmet and activated his comms. "Get me air command," he ordered. "Patching you through, sir. Please hold," came the response from the other end. This was the third time he had gotten that answer, and 65 did not know if they were being slow or if he was being impatient, nor did he care. He was about to begin insisting when he was forced down, a spray of laser strobes blackening his armor and a part of his helmet, and driving him into cover. He slid in the mud, his newly charred armor smoking under the cold rain as he came to rest behind the burnt-out body of the foremost sniper tank, soon joined by many more of his men. "Set up mortars!" he ordered into his comm, peeking out from behind cover and laying down fire as he did. His helmet package began filtering out the... No, let me clarify. This is in the middle of the civil war between the Republic and the Separatists. This is, like, in the middle of it. So, the Republic was fighting other people while this happened. But yes, it is towards the end, but not after. The rain, highlighting silhouettes in his field of vision for him to target. 65 began dropping them wherever he could find them, feeling vicious vindication as he killed one and then 3 more. He honed in on the 4th silhouette, sighting it down and then feeling the cold bite of the rain sink into his very blood. The silhouette he was tracking grew larger and larger and larger, its details coming more and more into focus as it cleared the distance between them, moving at a frightening pace. Fire was streaming from its left arm, and its right seemed to be sparking and crackling with lightning, burning away the rain that fell onto it in sheets of steam. But more horrifying than any of
Yeah.
that was the sound it was making. A sound that grew louder as it scrambled and clawed its way closer to the faltering clone lines. It was screaming, a horrible, nightmarish wail that managed to ring out like the dirge of a terrible droid and the frantic death screams of a person being opened up without anesthetic. Hostile walker incoming! Brace for contact! Prepare to surround it! 65 ordered, firing down field into the thing. The commander tensed, feeling his eyes strain, widening in his skull when the walker swatted his shot out of the air with its sparking, bladed fist.
Oh!
It was bounding straight for him and his cover, the mud around them quaking at its rapid approach. He kept firing at it nonetheless, his breathing growing ragged as the thing came ever more into focus. By the many moons! Commander, what the cock is that thing? One of the men near him yelled, shock and disgust ringing in his voice like a clearly struck chord. It's a fragged fanatic, and it needs to die! 65 yelled back. The thing was like a droid he'd only find in his worst possible nightmare.
Absolutely.
It was rigid
Correct.
and rusty, with a thick, roughly rectangular body supported by two large bird-like legs. Its arms were relatively thin, the bare bones of a war machine overlaid with cables, wires, pipes, larger tubes, and a fine coating of rust. At the end of the right arm was a fist composed of whirring, interlocking saw blades, sparking and crackling with horrid alien technology. Mounted to its left arm was nothing resembling a hand or fist, but rather two dripping, fiery nozzles, affixed to a pair of bulbous metal tanks. But by far the most horrible aspect of the bounding, agile
Yeah.
warwalker was not its weapons or depraved form, but rather its single soul occupant. Crucified in the center of its body, held spread by the puncturing tendrils of hundreds of extending cables, was the brutalized form of a nude woman. The only garment she wore was a blindfold, the two-headed eagle of the insane Imperium printed onto its face.
Yikes.
The Imperial was covered in scrapes, cuts, bruises, and blood, most of which seemed to be her own. She screamed from a red-tinged mouth as if she had flayed her own lips by the force of her voice alone. And aside from the protection the arms provided her, she seemed to have no defense whatsoever. At first, 65 had taken this to mean that she was a hostage, perhaps a citizen of Axum being used as a grimly applied human shield. He was disabused of that notion when she came upon him, sweeping one of her suspended arms, muscles bunching and flexing to perform the act, which nearly left 65 gawking as the machine aped her less than a second later. She was not a meat shield, she was the damned pilot of the insane thing! He barely had time to think those thoughts before he
Yep.
was forced to hit the dirt. Her passing fist of blades taking most of the cover he had been using away, as well as rending every trooper who had been sheltering behind it, besides himself. Burnt gore and burning shards of metal splattered down over his blackened armor, but by the time he rose, the death machine had moved on, rending open the unfortunate troopers behind him and pouring gouts of burning fuel onto those who found themselves on her left. But it would not last long, he could see, as his men began to enclose the walker, firing all the while. The thing was sturdy, its bare frame eating volleys of blast that would have sundered smaller vehicles. It would not matter, or at least it wouldn't have, if not for the follow-up attack. As the clones closed in around the rampaging walker, Commander 65 heard the barely audible, distant whomps of grenade launchers, and watched as explosives of all manner rained down into the men massing behind and around the dreadful wailing machine. Bodies were tossed, chopped, and burned to pieces as the rain of death fell into them, spreading chaos among
They
the
are
clone ranks.
brutal and terrifying.
65 rose, a string of red
All right, there we go. I was waiting until she got off the screen to read. Thomas, thank you for the super chat. The description sounds like if a Roman had to fight a Celt berserker mounted on an elephant for the first time. Oh yeah, nope, that's pretty accurate though. That is very similar. Correct. Thank you everyone for behaving. You're very, very good today. Thank you.
Red innards hanging from his helmet. He tossed down his DC-15 and drew his powerful sidearm, a heavy blaster pistol. With that, he began to approach, coming in at an angle and launching the machine as it tore its way up his men. The thing moved like an ape-like abomination, smashing and rending clones wherever it could catch them. The pilot of the inhuman contraption suffered many blaster shots, losing a hand and a foot, but seemed to take some pains to defend herself, though she did not seem slowed or impaired by her injuries. 65 watched how the gears in its arms swung, how they cranked and turned as she swept her death-dealing limbs this way and that. He reached down with his free hand and took out his EMP grenade and came closer still.
Oh yeah, that's gonna be good.
It was now that ARC Trooper Kindles leapt out from the crowd of fleeing troopers being driven before the flailing walker. He raised the repeating blaster cannon he had no doubt taken from another clone, letting loose with a line of tight blue shots as he bellowed a challenge to the walker. The machine monster tried to guard its flesh core, as it had before, but Kindles was too accurate, too prepared with his stance and mounting. The engine of destruction came for him, heeding his challenge as he unloaded his shots, both screaming at the other, but even the warding, sparking fist of the metal monstrosity failed to protect it from the ARC Trooper's attack. The woman bound to the center of the machine was ripped into ragged halves by the line of blaster fire.
Ooh,
her
gross.
spine severed and legs falling forward almost out of the machine. The woman screeched and then went silent, her lower half held dangling gruesomely by a few adhering tendrils that laced her spine. The machine pitched, losing control of its pacing and momentum and falling forward onto the slurry of mud below it, further crushing the imp pilot beneath it. The whole mangled mess came to rest at Kindles' feet, the clone's chest rising and falling rapidly as the machine slid to a stop before him. Slowly, he turned around to the other troopers, tossing off his repeating blaster. 65 had just drawn close enough to hear his next words. "See that? That's how you bring an Imperial clanker down!" His voice was cut off, as was his right limb when the wreckage beneath him stirred and struck. Bladed arm reaching to destroy the boasting clone. The subtle movement had given it away, and Kindles had begun to leap aside when the claws reached for him, cleaving off his right arm and tossing the ARC Trooper several meters into the crowd.
Oh gosh.
The woman, or at least the half of her that was not blasted into ribbons and crushed under her machine, began to scream again. The hands and arms of the wall walker gouged furrows into the mud as it tried to drag itself closer to the surrounding clones, flames erupting from the nozzles on its left arm. It was this arm that 65 targeted, pitching his grenade at it and aiming for the bundle of gears and servos that connected the weapon's limb to the main body of the walker.
Wow, she is a tough cookie.
The sphere clinked as it struck the walker, the grenade bouncing and then catching in one of the gapped teeth of a turning cog within the joint. Just as it was going to be crushed by the thrashing movement of the limb, it burst, releasing its aura of electrical disturbance into the surrounding area and, most notably, into the machine it had struck. Stepping lightly, having never stopped, he ran up the paralyzed arm, blaster pistol held tightly. The half-drowned, half-crushed, half-intact pilot did not seem capable of noticing him, or any single trooper that was not part of the mass before her, and thus provided no direct resistance as the clone stepped onto her still limb, climbing it like a messy maintenance ladder with only one arm, moving swiftly and without any pause. He soon found himself balancing atop the pitching, shaking body of the thing, balancing precariously as he dashed over to the center of its frame. He reached down with his free hand and grasped tight a handhold he found in the pitted, scorched metal. With his grip secure, he dropped down, hanging from his arm and landing beside the bound, thrashing form of the Imperial pilot. She howled and clawed at him with her hand and stump, leaving trails and lines of mud and blood across his white and black armor. 65 wasted no time, jamming the barrel of his blaster rifle into her open, wailing mouth, knocking out 2 of her teeth in the process and pulling the trigger.
Ouch.
The blindfolded woman's eyes seemed to glow behind the wrap as ionized Tabana gas burned a hole through flesh and bone, hollowing out her skull in a single instant. The machine and the pilot it held slumped down, movements relaxing as the now titanic corpse sank into the mud.
Okay, you
But
gotta double
65
tap
was
it.
not
Yes,
done.
I agree. Double tap, guys.
He blasted her again and again until little remained of her head outside of a blackened, jagged stump. And then he jammed the gun into the open hole of her throat and fired again and again.
Yep.
He spent nearly 20 seconds in this act before tearing himself free and climbing the wreckage, panting hard, blood and ash washing away in the rain. "They are monsters!" he bellowed into the sky. The commander raised his pistol-bearing fist, slick with red and black gore, and aimed it in the direction of the retreating Imperials. "So make sure you kill them all!" the clone commander roared, his army echoing his voice and beginning the charge once more with even more fervor than before. As he watched the men under his command join his battle cry and swarm around the wrecked walker, he received the communication he'd been waiting for.
Flesh.
Lazarus was at the lip, his gear set, but he had not gone over yet. The Major and a few others were still laying down covering fire for the men strapping on their ascension gear. The tech priests had welded strips of steel to use for cover along the lip, and while these barriers could only absorb a couple of blaster shots before being penetrated, they were certainly better than nothing at all. But now the Replicae were back at it, and if anything, dealing with the penitent engine had only made the Republic toy soldiers angrier by far. He watched as a cascading rain of blue bolts and falling mortar fire started at the tail end of the retreating Calambian line and began to run up its length like a ruthless avalanche of thundering death. The coordinated wave of overlapping munitions was fed by a quintet of nearby surviving Caterpillar walkers, their main cannons becoming a part of the incoming tide of obliteration, which the Major watched blow the last of his retreating men into bloody pieces.
Ooh.
He barely had time to register the loss, the volley not ceasing its thundering as it ran down those not already at the lip. Instead, the cracking, roaring front of death picked up speed as it made its way straight for the edge. "Holy fucking throne! Everybody jump!" Lazarus called out, panic riddling his voice as he tossed his las gun aside and spun around to face the open air behind him. His guts hit the bottoms of his feet, and he felt parts of him deep inside snap and break as he ran headlong into the gap. He opened his mouth to scream and was unsure if he was succeeding, being far from the only one as all the remaining Calambians ran at full speed for the ledge. Lazarus's body got halfway past the lip before the pressure wave from the pursuing explosions propelled it far past where his leap would have carried him, sending him sailing into the yawning cavity of the city below. For all that, the Major was, in truth, still intact, a fact he could not appreciate in the moment, screaming his lungs raw as he swung down on his cable, silencing a second later as he passed from the waking world. He returned to it abruptly as his limp body collided with the wall, knocking all the breath from his lungs and leaving the Major scrambling and gasping in a most undignified manner for several prolonged seconds.
Yikes, bro. Also, Hunter, thank you so much for subscribing. I hope you're enjoying stream today. I think this is your first stream. So, thank you so much for subscribing today.
He was fortunate no commissar was present to witness it.
Yeah.
He was also fortunate to have neither struck the side of the platform with too much force, nor from any angle that would have broken his neck. Several Calambians had not been so lucky. Some had jumped in their panic without any cables at all, and others had managed to escape much as Lazarus had, only to meet with grievous injury or death upon striking the wall. The beleaguered Major groaned, hanging from the line, dazed and swinging for several moments before he finally blinked out of his stupor and got his legs positioned to the side of the building. He felt like dying. Every burn, every bruise and broken bones screaming at him after the stunt he had just pulled, their chorus of pain joined gleefully by a host of new injuries. But, at least, he had found himself nearer to the bottom than the Calambians who were choosing to descend naturally. With a grunt and a kick of his legs, he began to descend towards the end of his cable. As he did, he indulged in the fact that they were not being shot at, and dared hope that the Republic clones would assume them all dead. Looking around, he could see the thousands of Imperial soldiers making their way down, struggling to keep their footing in the watery downpour. Most of the men were completely exposed as they focused on their descents, and Lazarus realized without much effort what a slaughter their withdrawal would become if the clones of the Republic realized that they were still alive. The Major felt a little hope enter him as he reached the end of his cable segment, deploying a smaller anchor to the spot before releasing the mag hook which had tethered his longer line to the building they were scaling. He leaned left as the magnetic end fell down, hearing it thunk against the metal below him, followed shortly by a string of creative Calambian curses. As he finished reeling in the hook, he noticed that there were odd metal wedges sticking out from the building, jutting from the wall around and below him. They were just large enough for a big man to crouch behind, and some even had what looked like heavy weapons mounted onto their vertical surfaces, barrels facing up. Lazarus sighed in a soft bit of relief as he recognized the handiwork of the tech priests, who had clearly gone about creating some cover and even little hardpoints to use in their descent should the worst come to pass. Lazarus had just managed to reattach the magnetic hook to the wall in front of him when that passing began. He winced, head jerking about as a scream was issued from above, muffled by the pounding rain, yet soon joined by a chorus of others. His eyes darted, blinking ice water clear as he scanned the spreading chaos above and around him, catching telling details as he did. A soldier was hanging limp on his own cable, while another was convulsing just below the first, also hanging, smoke rising from several burning holes in his body. Then, a third man cried out and died in a series of spasms, hanging directly above Lazarus. Looking up, he narrowly avoided the dead man's falling corpse, his cable frayed and severed, its ends red-hot and smoking. Looking up through the now cleared space, the Major began to understand what was happening. With a grunt of ignored pain and intense panic, he fingered the control mechanism for his ascension cable and began to go down.
"The Replicate have spotted us! Descend, soldiers! On the double!"
He barked into his vox bead. The Republic soldiers far above them were lying down, using the lip of the platform for cover as they peeked out with their long rifles and fired downward into the escaping Imperials. This, at least, seemed to limit the number who could engage them, but they were difficult to fire back on or suppress. Still, the guardsmen tried, both the Major and his Calambians. Most of the Imperials drew their weapons, descending on their automatically unwinding cables while firing back up at the clones. Lazarus saw one Replicate corpse drop, and then another, and another. Brief and tumbling blurs of white, ghosts of the Republic's heretics.
Hi fan, it's going well. I hope you're having fun playing D&D. It's going well. The Sister Repentia, definitely gruesome, but honestly, she's a trooper. I'm impressed. I'm very impressed with how hardcore she is. Very hardcore. And I'm glad that the clones find him very, well, repulsive, let's just say.
Souls dragged silently to hell. The sight was more than a little gratifying for the ailing Major, until one corpse collided headlong with a soldier under his command, a vengeful wraith refusing to die alone.
I hope you have fun playing
Lazarus
D&D.
grit his-
I want to know what. Well, if you're a DM, then I guess you're playing everything. Class of choice. I'm curious to know.
teeth and swung himself over to one of the armed hardpoints the Tempris had set up, grabbing onto the wedge of metal when it came within reach and adhering himself to the spot with his short anchor. Firmly affixed, he sat back and looked at the weapon which was...
Yes, thank you, Cape Morning. It is raining men, as the great Brecky once said. It is raining men. Hallelujah. It's raining men.
now mounted before him, resisting the urge to whistle as the long, blessed form of an autocannon revealed itself through the haze of oncoming rain. He checked the chamber and firing mechanism with a couple of cursory glances, finding the weapon oiled, loaded, and mounted with a particularly long spool of armor-piercing ammunition. The Major was grateful, as he would be unable to reload it in the position he was hanging in. He was less pleased with the makeshift mounting, which did not allow him to move his aim very much, but at his distance, adjusting by a few centimeters would be all he needed.
Yeah.
Lazarus squinted his eyes in the rain, taking one more moment to identify the shapes of his men and the origin of his foes, before he oriented the gun and squeezed down on the thick trigger in his hand. The barrels of the weapon spun with a whine, before abruptly spilling forth a thundering shower of molten lead, like defiant anti-rain, falling up instead of down, burning and killing in place of cooling and nourishing. He fired through the lip of the platform, penetrating the thick civilian metalwork and shredding the clones who hid behind it for cover. His example was soon followed all across the broad side of the vast ascent, as men took up similar positions and manned heavy weapons to cover their retreating brothers and sisters. All the while, the majority of the Imperial force continued its frenzied attempts at retreat, and the Major dared believe that many, if not most, might escape. It seemed the tech priests had saved the day, their emplacements proving a decisive advantage on this oddest of battlefields.
Yeah, it's a good
Or
choice.
at least, so it had seemed.
Oh,
Then Lazarus
I got
saw
all
the
excited.
first brilliant lance of emerald light, piercing the veil of rain above him and tearing into the side of the building. The humming beams continued cutting men in half and severing ascension cables as they strafed across steel, sending loyal Calambians tumbling and screaming to their fates. This was joined by bone-shaking blasts produced from the steaming maws of mass driver launchers,
Well,
carried two at a time between wings
it
which
was a
spat
good run,
luminous
boys.
death. The impacts of their solid and explosive munitions were enough to send ripples and rolling distortions through the metal and glass of the building's surface, shattering and shaking loose tens of men in but a few milliseconds. Lazarus looked up and out, away from the clones above him who were shooting down and out towards the yawning void. There, swooping and hovering like the vicious storm snipes of cursed Carcosa, were the murmuring, hovering forms of the Republic's clone gunships, now redeployed on the orders of a vengeful commander. Ah, feck! Lazarus groaned, unhooking his anchor and swinging down and away from the emplacement a mere second before it was pounded into slag by a
shoot.
rain of medium blaster cannon fire. The Major fell and spun out of control, yelling in fear and working hard not to pass out again, to keep himself just level enough to retain some measure of his senses. He activated the winding release on his belt-mounted rappel spool, undermining the force of his swing by releasing more and more of the length and losing altitude all the while. The fighting retreat of the Calambian forces dissolved into an unabashed rout, thousands of men running, or rather rappelling as quickly as they dared down the side of the building, death chasing and catching them in droves as they went. They'd never make it. It was over, the Major knew. Almost over, he corrected himself. Lazarus reached into his belt and pulled free his last grenade.
Get
the
him.
grenade. When he had been made a Major, he had been given access to just a few select pieces of war gear that had been available to his predecessor. From among all of those things,
The
he
holy
had chosen
hand
one
grenade?
particular weapon among them to make sure he kept a grenade. a vortex grenade.
Oh my gosh.
He looked at the grinning, skull-like weapon he gripped in his hands, grasping the pin and trigger before thinking better of it. He scanned around instead, eyes moving in a frenzy before spotting a soldier descending relatively nearby, a grenade launcher strapped to his back. The Major clenched his aching teeth and began to swing, moving back and forth until he caught the man's shoulder, making him cry out and struggle. Hold on! Hey! Listen to me!
Give me your...
Fucking listen! The Major said to the flailing soldier,
Give me
punching
your
him across the
weapon.
face to punctuate the point. The young Calambian grunted, covering his face and ceasing most of his struggling as he cradled his broken nose and looked at the Major. Sir? He muttered past his fingers and dripping, bloody nose. Your grenade launcher! I need it! He yelled over the sounds of men screaming and the high-pitched whine of laser weapons sawing through metal. No!
Ah, come on!
65 watched from his position on the lip as the slim resistance of the retreating Imperials was butchered. His gunship support arriving as promised and targeting the Imperial hardpoints before then taking their time to scrape the fleeing cultists off the platform with persistent laser and blaster fire. Added to the clones like him who were shooting down into the retreating imps from above, it left little chance that any of them would survive the commander's retaliatory assault. Then, something odd happened. Something 65 had no way to anticipate and no understanding of. It began subtly, or at least relatively subtly. All the colors in the air changed, shifted somewhat. At first, he thought it was something wrong with his HUD, but soon he realized it was far more than just that. And he was not the only one being affected. This effect swiftly deepened, becoming so shocking that the fighting faltered all around them. The colors on everything seemed to invert, white clones becoming black, blackened clones becoming white, and more. The effect lasted only 8 or so seconds and was accompanied by a bizarre sound, a sound 65 could not hear with his ears, but rather with his mind. It was like a deep-throated whispering, so low it was barely there, yet undeniably present. Then, just like that, the effect ended, and everything seemed to return to normality. For approximately 2 standard seconds.
Yep.
The next sound was a real, normal sound, and he heard it as a loud pop, similar to the sound of a corked bottle being opened. It was such an innocent, innocuous sound when compared to what it was heralding. 65's eyes grew wide and ached in his skull, red tears rimming his vision as he looked straight into the following interspatial detonation. He saw it, but he could not understand it. In a report, he would have described it as a black hole, one which was not shaped like a circle. If pressed, he'd describe it with great distress as a gash of colorless thirst or unlight. He would attempt to explain its shape as both ultra-Euclidean in nature, while undeniably drafted over a bent and twisted surface of nothing.
That is a word.
He'd babble about its size, both large enough to touch so many of the gunships, yet too short to reach the men and clones on the building. Within a theoretical interrogation, thoughtless to the integrity of his mind, the clone would scream about the things he saw inside. The things which looked at him without any eyes, or rather, looked at him with his own eyes, laughed at him with his own voice. But at the time, as he witnessed it, all he could do was scream. The clones had no idea not to look into the vortex as it was spawned. The explosion, if one could call it that, was not bright, and it cast no shadows. In spite of that, few Imperials made the same mistake, ducking their heads down and hiding their eyes as the unimaginable weaponized rent in time and space swelled in the air behind them. The tears in the air spilled and split away from their origin, the eldritch technology that forced the phenomenon to occur acting in the semblance of a shaped charge, sparing most of those on the building while hungrily seeking those thinking minds within the gunships. Twisting arms of void-like force warped the air and spiraled out, lancing through all but the farthest and most dispersed of the gunships, causing a horrific myriad of effects. Some ships exploded, combusting into balls of pinkish fire. Others seemed to shrink and fall away, as if having been tossed down a long, inescapable tunnel. And others still merely vanished, the details of their unraveling rendered indescribable by the very nature of their unmaking. 65 struggled to make chronological sense of the explosion, for while it seemed to last for hours, the rain only seemed to resume falling after its damage had been done, and the sweltering wound in reality sealed itself. The commander lay, blinking blood out of his eyes as he tried to recover from what had just happened. No more fire was exchanged. He could hear and see that through his red-tinged
Everyone
vision.
is so stunned.
For a couple of
clone
heart-stopping
side.
seconds, 65 feared all his air support had been destroyed by the weapon, whatever it was. Soon, rage replaced fear as his command HUD began to update his details, revealing that most of his gunships were still in one piece, but all of those were clearly fleeing the airspace. "Wing Commander, come in! Turn around! Return to the field!" 65 ordered in a hoarse voice, but he received no reply.
Oh no.
He shouted the order with increasing ferocity, but was either cut off or ignored, and the air support that all but guaranteed his revenge did not return. He clenched his teeth, felt the
they
warmth
went
of his crimson
insane.
tears reach his lips, tasted the metallic tang of his own blood. It was pooling in his helmet, and so he rose to his feet and released the seals. With a hateful gesture, he tossed it aside, cracking the visor with the force of his throw. He looked down again, past his feet, past the ledge of the park, and saw that while no one was shooting any longer, the Imperials were still effecting their retreat, still slipping through 65's clenched fingers. He spat blood and spun to the officer at his right, a clone who had been formerly crouching at his side, now
Buddy,
standing
I'm
and at
worried
attention.
about you.
"Get jetpacks equipped on everyone!" he ordered. "Sir?" the clone said hesitantly. "You heard me! Mount up! Immediately! We are not letting a single imp get off this wall! On the double trooper now!" 65 spat, anger yanking each word past wet lips. "Sir, we don't have enough jetpacks. We can supply maybe 1/10 of our force. The rest will..." the officer began to report. "We'll use ascension cables. Hand them out. One for each trooper without a pack," the commander finished for him. "Yes, sir. But, sir, your face," the clone added.
Your face?
"What about my face?" 65 snapped. The man pointed a slightly quivering finger. "You're bleeding, sir. A lot. Your eyes are..." the officer
They're
began.
black now?
"My eyes are fine. Get about your orders, trooper!" he snapped back. The clone saluted in response. "Yes, sir," he said before doing as ordered. In the meantime, 65 selected the men who would join him with jetpacks, picking them out by name and number. Each responded to his bleeding eyes and face in some way, but he shoved all such concerns ruthlessly aside. He could see fine, and he was not growing any weaker, despite the persistent streams of red which fell from his face and began to dye his armor. Soon
Oh.
enough, they
It's not just a little blood, it's a lot of blood. Okay then,
were
buddy.
ready. The other men lined up in staggered formations, ascension cables rigged to belts and secured behind them. "Bring up the wounded after we are deployed," he ordered to the officer. "Arm them and lay them down by the edge of the park. They can help us as best they can from there." 65 finished, sheathing a damaged vibroblade into his belt, now checking his jetpack controls, subtle twitches riddling his movements. The officer said nothing at first, simply watching as 65 tested his pack, sparking the flames beneath it. "Sir," he said a moment later. 65 felt rage spike through his every nerve and fiber. He needed obedience right now, not conscience.
Dang.
"What?" the commander yelled, spinning to fully face the officer. The clone seemed undaunted behind the visor of his white helmet, merely pointing over his shoulder at several massive looming forms. "The ATTEs are here, sir," he reported in a monotone. In spite of the man's lack of enthusiasm, 65 felt his rage melt into perverse joy. Now, yes, now his revenge could truly begin. For his pod, for the clones, for the Republic.
Oh boy.
Lazarus clung to the building, having deployed his anchor and wrapped his arms and legs around an access ladder he had been near enough to reach. He held on for all he was worth, clutching so hard his fresh augmentics sparked and bled pain into his mind. But that pain was not greater than the fear he had felt after launching the weapon, and the terror within him handedly overcame any surgical agony he may have felt.
Yeah, that's terrifying.
There was no wind. In fact, the rain ceased falling, and that turbulence which did exist was stilled. He closed his eyes tightly, the weird light coming from the vortex bomb still finding his sight in defiance of his actions. And though a deep nausea permeated him as the effects carried themselves out, he was thankful that this seemed to be the extent of his symptoms. He waited until the unlight had faded, and then looked around.
"Guardsmen, continue the retreat,"
he said softly into his vox bead, taking his own orders and disengaging the anchor, beginning his descent at once. The Major was glad to see that the man he had taken the grenade launcher from had survived as well, bewildered by what had just happened, but moving nonetheless.
You helped with
They
that, buddy.
went down together, reaching the ends of their cables near each other, both trading over to their anchors to reset their main lines once more. It was a few seconds after they had resumed their movement that Lazarus received a crackling, incomplete communique through his vox bead. "Major, this is Captain Jones on the up-facing left flank. Be advised, we've got big toy soldiers in Nothing else made it through, but Lazarus spread the warning anyway, prepping the men for a renewed assault, and none too soon. The Republic replique came running over the side of the platform, cables adhered to their belts and unspooling. They swung down right away and landed on their feet, barrels pointed down as they began a speedy advance. Lazarus and his men opened fire immediately, but quickly found themselves horrifically outnumbered by the mass of the now pursuing enemy. The clones were frenzied and without fear, charging down the side with absolutely no thought for cover or formation outside of what would allow the greatest number of them to fire into the Major's forces as they ran. Lazarus was truly
that's not
shocked
good.
by the desperation of their pursuit, and this only grew the more he observed their assault. The large rifles and automatic gear of the replique forces meant that they were forced to charge at a pace determined by whatever their ascension gear had been set to beforehand. A theory that was backed up by the hanging corpses of the struck and killed clone soldiers near the front, who, in spite of their souls leaving their mortal coils, were still descending in neat formation with their maddened brothers beside them. At that forced pace, they would overcome his men unless their cables came up short, something he prayed would occur every second as the battle line swelled and swelled. Trails of fire and smoke streaked through the gray, raining sky above them, and he squinted, heart racing as he spotted what at first seemed to be missiles. Soon, however, they came close enough to be recognizable as infantry mounted on flight packs. They flew down over the heads of their brother clones and began to open fire, strafing the side of the building with scathing sprays of blue blaster bolts. The trajectory of one veered in his direction, and he found himself forced to kick off and away from the wall in a sudden rush of movement, narrowly avoiding the trail of burning death that struck through his former position. He swung out of control for a moment before the man near him caught him and helped him steady himself. Lazarus thanked the Calambian, brandishing a last pistol and firing up as the younger soldier beside him drew out a compact autogun, unfolded it, loaded it, and began to open chittering sprays of fire on the enemy above them. The vertical battlefield was suddenly filled with soldiers and skirmishes, the massive clone army descending at rapid pace towards the Imperials below them, their liquid cable dispensers feeding their oncoming assault, as rigid boots stepped through glass windows, walking across the shutters beneath. The flashes of las, gun, and blaster fire were joined by the crackling flashes of natural lightning, flaring bright and fierce above them and around them, reminding the Major of the insane altitude this battle was taking place at.
Yeah, like, that's nuts.
He was barely aiming at anything anymore, his mind overcome by the amount of crisis happening around him. Breathing heavily, pain a constant companion, Lazarus found all he could do now was descend and fire up at the approaching army of Republic war clones, hoping and praying that he would somehow reach the desired floor in one piece. He was in this state when something came rocketing around, down from above and right into him like a maligned comet trailing smoke and fire.
It's the guy. It is the guy. The angry guy. Personally, I hope Lazarus wins because he's had a pretty level head throughout this whole thing. Not that 65 can't be, mad about things. But, he's concerning me, so I kind of hope Lazarus wins this one.
Fire. The Major grunted, all the air driven out of him as two of his ribs cracked under the sudden tackle. Dazed and disoriented, swinging while the new attacker clung to him, Lazarus had already been punched twice before he gathered enough of his wits to shield himself with his arms. A clone equipped with a jetpack had fallen upon him and was in the process of beating him bloody with his bare hands. Lazarus struggled, but his metal limbs, strong as they were also new, slow, and painful to use. And it was all he could do to ward the replique off. The clone in question had no helmet and was bleeding profusely from his eyes. On top of that, those same eyes were wrong. The irises a deep yellow and red like fire.
Oh.
His glare burned with raw hatred, and he punched into Lazarus's broken ribs, kneed him in the stomach, and snapped an elbow across the Major's face.
Yikes.
The Calambian guardsman could do little more than gasp, clutching his pistol and trying to fire into the trooper, but without success. But he was not alone. The other soldier behind them had noticed his Major's predicament and cried out a warning before opening up with a spray of bullets which he was quickly forced to veer away. The clone spun, hanging on to Lazarus and choking him with a heavy forearm as he positioned the struggling Major between himself and the man who was trying to shoot him. The Calambian floundered, but the clone did not, drawing a blaster pistol with his free hand and firing 8 shots into the Imperial. "Throne, damn it! No!" Lazarus bellowed, trying to jerk around with all the power he had left, firing sprays of last fire from his own pistol as he did. The bloody clone hissed as a beam struck his leg, blackening the armor there, and elbowed Lazarus in the side of the head. The Major staggered, sucking in a breath to recover, but it was too late. With a roar, the clone knocked the gun out of his hand and punched him across the jaw, knocking him limp for a couple of seconds.
No!
The replicate drew a knife as he pinned Lazarus tightly to the side of the building, jetpack burning to facilitate it. The Major's face lolled up, and he could see, distantly, the horrific shapes of the Republic's 6-legged gunwalkers, curling and magnetically locking their feet to the side of the platform, beginning their own descent and adding their own firepower to the clone assault. He felt armored fingers grab a fistful of his hair and yank his face forward, forcing the Major to look into the ghastly face of the bleeding clone. "Are you the commander?" the clone asked. Lazarus said and did nothing, and was rewarded with a backhanded strike across the face. "It's over!" the clone yelled through the din of battle and the soft roar of the rain.
He is not thinking.
But as he did, a new kind of light began to fill the air. It was a light that Lazarus had seen before, that tugged a smile at his torn lips. though his barely functioning mind
Exterminatus.
could scarcely explain why. What weapon made that light? He could not remember right there and then. Still, he did find some words to say as the clone before him raised his fist to strike him again.
Almost.
The Major said. The clone paused, leaned in, and hissed.
Almost what?
He demanded. As he did, more and more of that new light. That light that was not lightning, not traditional gunfire, or any of the other weapons they had been using. In his mind, the
Almost
Major
over.
recalled the communique he had received just before the battle resumed, and realized he had misplaced its significance. Captain Jones had advised him about incoming big toy soldiers.
Almost over.
Lazarus said, just as the clone
Big
began
toy
to notice
soldiers?
the new combatants, their
Angels?
powerful new weapons, and the speeding shapes of their large forms. The clone scowled, and the Major smiled to spite him. It's over for you, one way or the other, the bleeding clone declared, reaching forward with his knife and hooking Lazarus's cable with its humming edge. The Major lacked the strength.
The Star Spangled Banner is playing, which is like very cool. Let me tell. Hang on, you can listen to it. Listen to it. The Star Spangled Banner.
The speeding shapes of their large forms.
Right now.
The clone scowled, and the Major smiled to spite him.
Boom.
It's over for you,
Rockets,
one way or the other,
glare.
the bleeding clone declared, reaching forward with his knife and hooking Lazarus's cable with its humming edge. The Major lacked the strength to stop him and could only watch as the cord was cut and he fell away, the world feeling distinctly surreal as he did. Imperial vehicles now stormed the side of the wall, their hatches open and exhaling volley fire into the clone flanks, while their dedicated turrets blazed, spitting plasma, chain lass, and bolter fire. And in the center of it all was the hateful face of the clone who had killed him, becoming smaller and smaller as he fell further and further away. Lazarus closed his eyes then. His brief time in command was now over.
I doubt it. His name is Lazarus. Lazarus, man is not gonna die. He will have horrific injuries. But he will get new augmentations. That is my guess. Also, I need to know who plays that version of the Star Spangled Banner, because that went hard. That went so hard. I'm sorry. That was beautiful music choice. Yes, so much freedom. Fantastic. I was feeling it. I was getting the chills. I was like, yes, man is dying a hero's death, and I am here for it. Freedom intensifies. Yes. Ka! That's my bald eagle impression. We'll continue. I'm sorry. That was too good. That was too good to not include. Oh my gosh. Yes. Press F. Press F to pay respects.
They came in the darkness, cloaked within the storm, swaddled in the rain and thunder. Powerful weapons, instruments of savagery and death, were held in readied hands, each bearer still, silent, attentive. The Scions did not crack jokes to relieve their tensions, nor did they pray or in any way distract themselves from their task. Instead, the elite Imperial warriors regarded every second individually, watching it carefully as it passed before doing the same with the next. They were prepared to spring into action at any moment, be it as a team alongside the men and women they had drilled with for years, or alone, as the sole survivors of any given crisis. They were prepared. The
Beep,
Tempestor
beep,
Prime,
ah.
Aloysius Cinder, had been quick to secure the use of many Taurox Prime trooper transports for his operations at the onset of his deployment, and now his forethought truly shone as brilliance. For through their strategic use, he had liberated himself from the need to rely on their faltering air forces for their deployment options. And that seemed truer now more than ever before, as he saw the unique nature of the battlefield they were entering. His forces had divided, one half to secure the survivors near the bridge, and the other to come here in order to retrieve the Major. Vox communications had been sporadic at best, but their tech priests had managed to recalibrate their auger arrays to pick up on Lazarus's Vox frequency. They could not understand anything he was saying, nor communicate back to him beyond sending static towards his receiver, but they could use the weak signal to track his location. Arriving from below, the Tempestor Prime and his soldiers were pressed against the backs of their chairs or hung from their restraints. As their transports sped up the side of the metal building, using the metal shutters and Durasteel frame to adhere their magnetized treads. Air support had been lost, but the side...
Please, someone catch Lazarus princess style as he falls. That would be glorious.
knew other ways to deploy and would not be held at bay by something as trivial as the enemy owning air superiority. And so, the work had fallen on to the honorable fleet of the Taurox Primes, which Aloysius had made sure to secure prior to the enemy even entering the system. He'd fought in hive cities before, and knew how invaluable they could be. And seeing what his auspex now revealed, he knew this would only be proven true several times over. Here, on the side of a building half the width of a small city, the Imperium was engaged in vertical warfare with an absolutely massive number of Republic replicae.
Yeah.
They were too many to defeat outright, but all they needed to accomplish was the successful withdrawal of their allied forces, and to do so while stinging the enemy hard enough to prevent further pursuit. And already the commander of these scions could see how imminently possible this goal was, as the first of his Taurox forces began to engage and disrupt the swarming wall of white soldiers and their vehicle support. Men of the Empire, prepare for battle. Pattern Sigma Prime. Deploy and counter-assault with extreme aggression. Primes Alpha, Beta, and Delta, follow our lead. We will target their walker platforms. Empty transports are to collect the retreating and wounded elements of the Colombian 503rd Assault Regiment. Keep an eye out for Major Lazarus. His safety and retrieval is currently our top priority. The Tempestor Prime was saying before he was unceremoniously interrupted by the tech priest aide who rode to his right. Major Lazarus's signal is approaching rapidly.
Hey guys, he's coming up on us really fast. Maybe you should catch him. You should catch him. Catch him.
The cyborg droned, spider-like in his alcove, a whole host of tendril-like mechadendrites holding him in place. How rapidly? The Tempestor Prime asked. Current calculations place him at near terminal velocity for this world's gravity. Well, 28 seconds before intercept. On the left side of the vehicle. The priest informed.
Catch him!
The Tempestor began to move without another word or gesture, seizing the ascension cable at his own hip and hooking it to a bar running along the center of the Taurox's roof. Despite the smoothness of his movements, it all looked undeniably odd when watched from a third view, since the Taurox was not level, but facing straight up as it approached the battle above them. In spite of this, it elicited no remarks from the silent men and women within, who watched their prime through the cold, glassy light of their encompassing Omni-Shield tactical helmets. Keep to my orders, he said as he worked open the hatch to the left of the climbing transport and, without so much as a look back, threw himself over the ledge, rappel cables squealing as it unwound after him. He jumped out in advance of—
Oh, come on. I'm not really spoiling it for you. once they said, once they said they were climbing up the building, I'm like, well, that's a possibility. He's either going to be salvageable from his fall to the bottom, or he's gonna get saved. So, once they said his safety is our top priority, like, well, I can read a room. I think I know what's gonna happen. So I'm not really spoiling it for you. You all are smart. You would have figured it out yourselves. So, I have full confidence that you would have figured it out on your own without my help. I just did it a little quicker. And you guys can't, like, you guys have your guesses, of course, but, you know, you're kind of not allowed to spoil things for me. Let's continue. Let's watch him get caught princess style.
Of their projected intersection, rain blasting his body the instant it exited the cabin of the vehicle. He knew that the Major would be falling at a much faster rate than he himself was, and estimated that he'd need the head start, particularly with his tall rocks continuing to ascend as he fell. Arms out, the Prime spun himself around so he was facing up and leveled out his fall. He saw that several bodies were falling all at once, composed of many men from both sides, and the sight made his heart quicken by just a pace. With little more than a twitch of reflex, he focused his Omni-Shield helmet package, squinting and triggering the hardware there to perform several intelligent overlay wipes. First, the rain vanished from his view, followed by the appearance of halos of light surrounding each of the soldiers which were falling above him. Less than a second later, the light around the falling clone soldiers winked out, leaving only the felled Calambians highlighted within the augmented sight. And then, in the last moment, those lights too winked out, one by one in rapid succession, until only one target remained: the falling, limp body of the Major. Acting quickly, Cinder moved his arms, maneuvering in the onrushing air to slide beneath the falling form of Lazarus in the final possible instance before he passed. The Prime wrapped his arms around the unconscious commander and grunted as they pitched and tumbled through the wet air, wasting no time in triggering his grab chute, and not a moment too soon. The line went taut, the Taurox now violently pulling the two men up after it. But the harshness of the pull and the lethal change in momentum...
That's gonna break his ribs. Not the Major's, but this dude's ribs are gonna be broken.
...was reduced to below bone-breaking levels by the mitigating power of the chute, which hummed on his back as the Tempestor Prime clung to the Major's body.
He was gonna break bones.
A breath or two later, the auto spool had begun reeling him in, drawing them both back towards the battle easily as it pulled up against their greatly reduced gravity and weight.
Nothing.
Though it would be a minute or so before the Prime would be physically back inside the Taurox, Cinder had already rejoined the fight in nearly every way imaginable.
Incredible.
Holding tight to his charge, he watched the engagements progressing through the powerful monitoring systems of his helmet, able to see and hear through the eyes and ears of his every soldier. From this tyrant's eye, he watched his plans fall into motion and made the slight adjustments they needed to fulfill their purpose. The hatches and doors slid open on countless rushing platforms, engines roaring against the pull of gravity as they clawed their way into and through the enemy ranks. Scions of the 50th Calambian Thunderbirds exited their assault craft on wings of smoke and fire, cutting through the rain on heavy-duty flight packs. Larger, slower, and less maneuverable than the Republic's variants, the Imperium's Vulcrus-patterned flight platforms made their virtues known as soon as the flying replicae attempted to make use of their own advantages. Unlike most of their Calambian brethren, the Thunderbirds did not eschew the use of lass weaponry, a fact they flaunted as they brought their Ryza-patterned hotshot volley guns to bear. Heavy and cumbersome, such weapons could normally not be fired by airbound infantry, with the Republic's own jet troopers favoring carbines over rifles for the distinct reduction in the weapon's weight. But the rigs used by the Imperial Scions had no such issues, and held their troops aloft in steady harmony as they took aim and opened fire. The volley guns rained crimson hell down upon the massed forces of the Republic's warrior caste, doing far more than blackening armor and burning flesh. Clones struck by the beams produced by these Ryzen weapons were turned to ashes almost instantly, most
Yikes,
unable to scream as they were incinerated, and those who did were universally unable to complete their last utterances. Were this the extent of the weapon's power, it would have been enough. It would have staved off the Republic. But no, for the volley guns, as their names suggested, unleashed persistent sprays of such beams, not single columns. Each gun spilled light as though it were cutting a portal straight into hell. Mist and clouds forming about the towering platform as the rain was boiled and vaporized in the unending hails of murder the Imperials were dispensing. Though caught without cover or blast shields, the clones found their defense in numbers, and quickly began targeting the hovering forms of the Scions, unleashing volleys of their own. But those volleys did not meet with flak plate, the paltry armor which could only resist blaster fire for 1 or 2 shots at best. Instead, the replicae of the Republic would find men sheathed head to toe in ceramite.
Yeah.
Blue bolts
it's
sizzling,
tough.
denting, and bouncing off and away from their armor as the Imperials continued to dispense death. More success was had when the crawling forms of the ATTE walkers oriented their blaster cannons on the Scions. Massive green bolts slamming into the flying soldiers and sending them spinning away, smoking and already dead within their cracked plates. Yet, even this proved a temporary reprieve from punishment, for no sooner had the crawling tanks begun to stall the tide of Imperial specialists than the Tempestor Prime's orders came to fruition. The Taurox Primes arrived in small herds of raiding vehicles, closing in around the lumbering, slow-moving walkers. Clone soldiers, unable to move or adjust themselves adequately in their current positions, screamed and died, run down and over by the Imperial vehicles as battle cannons, twin-linked hot-shot volley guns, and pintle-mounted storm bolters all opened fire without mercy or rest into the faces of the insectoid tanks. The transparent steel cockpit covers and gunner turrets were poor defense for the men inside as they were laid into with precision fire. The Scions within the Tauroxes neatly decapitating the Republic walkers one by one until none remained.
Yikes.
Their smoking, pockmarked forms falling dead off the side of the platform and into the yawning abyss beneath. The clones did not rout, however, and soon seemed to begin organizing themselves into focused fire teams, finding limited success in piling blaster bolts onto single targets. But by the time these tactics were implemented in any large way, the replicae had reached the ends of their lines. Furthermore, while they had been fighting off the Scions, the majority of the empty Taurox support platforms had spent their time collecting the fleeing Calambian guardsmen from the building wall, and ferrying them down to the exit floor, returning only to make repeat trips or to collect their Scions. Though the battle had been long, it was very nearly finished by the time Aloysius Cinder hauled the unconscious Calambian major into his vehicle and handed him off to the medic in his command squad.
That's insane.
They came with the storm, and as the storm broke, all the Republic had left of the sudden assailants was the blood-tinged mist which permeated one side of the park platform, and the losses they had taken at the hands of the Imperials. Coming back to the top of the platform, the remaining men would soon discover that the cornered survivors at the bridge had also vanished, slipping through their clenched fists and leaving the Republic forces with only trenches and the dead men within them. In the end, all the clones could take away was a lesson, and a painful one at that. And it was certainly one which Bloody Eyes would not soon forget.
Oh. Ba, 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 ba. That's good music. That's really good music. Okay, no more for today. No more. That we have done 4 hours. 4 hours. This is the last one for today. Yes, because the next one is 2 hours long. So, yeah, no. No more today. It's already so many episodes. 2 hours. Can you imagine 2 more hours of this? 2 more hours. I mean, I love the content, but your girl needs to eat. It's too good. Oh my goodness. Absolutely spoiled by Fan and the wonderful work he's done. Please follow Fan. Let's see, actually, 1 second. I'm gonna actually get his YouTube link. Hang on. 1 second. Let me get his link to his YouTube page. There, I'm gonna put it in the chats. Please follow. Follow, like. Please. Please and thank you. Because this is way too good. It's way too good. Very good knowing you, fake custodian. Wow. Wow. Of all the things. Of all things. Let's see if there's anyone we should raid into today. Bro, why did it have my stream on mute? Let us see. Oh, let's raid into this chick. She seems pretty cute. I don't know if she's on YouTube. Let me see if she's on YouTube really fast. I have no clue if she is, so we're just gonna look. Because I like to double raid rather than just like a single one. Let's see, her model looks cute. Okay, no, she's not live on YouTube, but we're gonna raid into her on the Twitch side because she looks cute, so why not? So, thank you everyone for joining today. I will release the schedule this week. Hopefully, we finish Alien Isolation. We will probably watch another one of these, and then I'm gonna try to come up with something fun for this week. That's a little bit different. So, thank you all for joining. Please follow the streamer's rules, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your evening. Okay? All right, everyone. I will see you later this week. Bye!